reborn in the empire where the sun never sets to become a pirate. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction, so please don't attempt real magic. The results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 226: New Order. After the Lee Francois tragedy, Nelson, deeply aware of the grave importance of the matter, immediately requisitioned fishing boats to report all the details of Operation Halloween to Sir Parker. The experienced Sir Parker saw an opportunity. With Lee Francois's survivors at hand, and especially with the mayor, who held a valuable position, Great Britain need not worry about being held responsible for the tragedy. On the contrary, the initiative to dispel the rumors was his, indicating that he had sufficient leverage to manipulate Fort-de-France. He immediately adjusted the war plan for the Windward Islands campaign, building on Operation Halloween to create the new Operation Christmas. Christmas, the birthday of the Lord, resurrection from the dead, light for all eternity. First, Sir Parker indulged the rumors against the British and fanned the flames, constantly exaggerating the details of the night of the Lee Francois tragedy, completely shifting the narrative towards British mastery. Second, upon learning that the heavily encumbered Halloween fleet had departed Grenada, he fabricated a false report claiming Nelson had taken control of St. George's Harbour and sent it to Fort-de-France through a Spanish merchant. Third, the main British fleet was secretly split. 4 frigates, led by a destroyer, formed a deceptive formation and remained off Grenada. The battle group, reduced to 17 ships but largely intact, was freed. Under the Knights' leadership, they infiltrated the Windward Islands at night and prowled the waters between Grenada and Barbados, awaiting further developments. On June 8, after the declaration that noble blood of France must not be shed in vain, the French plan was finally completely exposed to the Knight's eyes. Mount Pelée and St. George's Harbour, the Knight drew 2 red circles on his chart. After a moment's thought, he drew a blue circle at the address he had given the French in the waters west of Grenada. The Halloween fleet was the French's target, and the slave army that had escaped into the mountains was a mystery. The combined fleet would split in 2, one heading north and the other south. The Knight had no way of predicting how they would split. However, the Halloween fleet had a formidable reputation and possessed a heavily armed, Class IV frigate. To be on the safe side, the French must respond with a battle line. Therefore, the French battle line would march southward toward Grenada. Whether the entire battle line would march southward or split in 2 was of little importance to the Knight. The purpose of this deception was simply to split the combined fleets, weakening their strength, allowing the Knight to launch a campaign in the chosen sea area and achieve absolute dominance. This battlefield. The Knight drew a series of circles off the northern coast of Martinique. There's an Eastern motto about warfare: do the opposite of what you're doing, which the Knight had once encountered in a travelogue. The learned adventurer translated it as, don't let others guess your thoughts, impose your rule where they believe they control it. There's a similar saying in the West: hide a leaf, the forest is the safest place. Martinique, an overseas department of the Kingdom of France, enjoyed absolute control over it compared to other Caribbean colonies. However, the activities of the Halloween fleet temporarily weakened this dominance. Northeast of Martinique, the destruction of the Atlantic Defense Fleet left the military without a flank, and the northward flight of slave soldiers impacted the fishing trade in the northern ports. The waters there were now practically empty, but in the eyes of the French, it remained their backyard, and indeed it was. A portion of the northbound Allied fleet would undoubtedly choose this route, believing it to be safe and comfortable, not even requiring the meticulous preparation and meticulous vigilance of the Army's route. A godsend. The Parker fleet acted even earlier than the French. Sailing north from the depths of the Atlantic, they cut across the ridge route, deploying their forces late on the night of June 11, before the Allied fleet passed through, effectively blocking the route. 7 hours later, the French Revenge fleet, led by HMS Furious, captured Grenada. 29 hours later, the Knight received his grand prize, the main force of the combined fleet, led by HMS Illustrious, totaling 20 ships and unsuspecting. It was 11:38 a.m. on June 13, 1779, off the northern coast of Martinique, when the decisive naval engagement of the Anglo-French Battle of the Windward Islands officially began. The British, with the upper hand, deployed 17 warships, including the second-class ship HMS Duke of Wales, the third-class ships HMS Endeavour and HMS Son of Poseidon, and 4 fourth-class ships, with a total battleship battery of 470 guns. The flagship, HMS Duke of Wales, was commanded by Vice Admiral Sir Peter Parker, Admiral of the New World Fleet. The Franco-Dutch combined fleet hastily responded to the battle, comprising 20 warships, including the third-rank ship Glorious, Street van Nitrouw, and 4 fourth-rank ships, with a combined battleship battery of 370 guns. The flagship, Glorious, was commanded by Vice Admiral Ross Balfour, Vice Admiral of the New World Fleet. From the outset, the British held a commanding advantage in this decisive engagement, using outflanking attacks from smaller ships to keep the center of the battle line intact. The French were overwhelmed, and within just 2 hours of the battle, a fourth-rank ship was destroyed, forcing them to withdraw from the battle line. About an hour later, the Dutch flagship, Street van Nitrouw, suffered severe damage to its stern. The gunpowder explosion destroyed half of its deck, toppled its mizzenmast, and completely lost control of its wheels, rudder, and sails, rendering it completely incapable of continuing the battle. Her withdrawal sealed the combined fleet's defeat. At 3:22 p.m., Viscount Balfour ordered his escort to attack the retreat route, leaving 2 lightly damaged fourth-rank ships as the rearguard. The fleet slowly withdrew. Sir John Parker soon dispersed his battle line and ordered his entire army to mop up any remaining enemy forces, marking the end of the battle. At 7:45 p.m., the decisive Battle of the Windward Islands concluded with the 2 brig-class ships disengaging 82 kilometers east of the main battlefield. In this battle, the British, with 17 ships against 20 French and Dutch, sank 1 and severely damaged 4, sinking a total of 5 enemy warships of all classes and capturing 6. Among the captured ships were the severely damaged Dutch ship of the third rank, St. Van Nedroe, and 3 French ships of the fourth rank. St. Van Nedroe, severely damaged, sank while being towed to Kingston. A resounding British victory. The Battle of the Windward Islands concluded with Britain's sole victory. Nelson's Halloween fleet destroyed the French Atlantic Defence Fleet, while Sir John Parker's main fleet crushed the combined fleet. This marked the establishment of the new order of the seas Sir John Parker sought. Across the vast Caribbean and the wider Atlantic coast of North America, Great Britain's naval power reigned supreme, particularly in battleships of rank IV and above, accounting for nearly half of all other nations' combined naval power. France maintained its second-place position, but with a sudden loss of 4 rank IV ships and a large number of smaller vessels, it was no longer superior to the Spanish in absolute strength. The Spanish, no longer great, glorious, or aggressive, remained comfortably among the 3 powers, their strength concentrated in the Caribbean and virtually invisible along the Atlantic coast of North America. Further back, Portugal, Russia, Denmark, and, of course, the nascent United States. They maintained a more or less noticeable presence in the bountiful New World, neither forgotten nor particularly remembered. The Dutch, desperately preparing to restore their glory in the New World, suffered a crushing defeat, their New World flagship reduced to a mere corpse on the seabed, along with their unrealistic ambitions and dreams, a calamity lost to the fish. On June 24, the Martinique garrison confirmed that its militia had killed the leader of a looting mob, the Indian slave Lachemont, during a supply transport. Fort-de-France declared the War of Revenge a complete victory. On June 25, the French colonial authorities sent a note to Kingston, hoping to end the protracted maritime dispute between the 2 countries, restore peace and tranquility to the Caribbean independent of the situation in North America. The British colonial authorities strongly endorsed this proposal. As a gesture of good faith, they released the captured Count Gave-Auton, admiral of the frigates, and offered to return the refugees rescued from Le François during the war, including the distinguished Lord Alland, the mayor of Le François. This caused a global outcry. The Battle of the Windward Islands, also known as the Grenada Conflict, established Britain's position as a naval power in the New World, but it also resulted in the loss of the colony of Grenada. According to one set of data, during the 18th and early 19th centuries, the Windward Islands ocean trade was primarily sugar, with Barbados accounting for 70% of the total. The remaining islands combined accounted for less than half of this. Therefore, it's reasonable to speculate that Britain's loss of Grenada was part of a strategic plan, aiming for greater success at a lower cost. P.S. Is this surprising? Chapter 227 Drake's president is used to spending lavishly. June 26, 1779, at Lucy Manor, Jamaica. Lorraine, dressed in a tuxedo, gently drew aside the study curtains with a smile. Through the gleaming French windows, he saw Belle and Eoif, the brilliant sunshine, and the lush green grass. Tisk tisk tisk, a talented man, a beautiful woman, poetic and artistic, Belle finally mustered up the courage. Now that he has mustered up the courage, what kind of humiliation will he encounter? McCarthy is hostile to him. Hannah habitually stood in the darkest corner of the study, playing with her golden hair boredly, or to be more precise, she is a serious person, and is wary of everyone on the ship. I can hardly imagine a good result if you instigate Belle to pursue her. There's no way. Lorraine made a malicious smile. Offie is an employee, young and beautiful, and the most troublesome thing is that she is honest. It's very difficult to suppress Atrin from taking action against her, but her personality means that I can't treat her like Carmen or Noah. She will take it seriously. It's better to say that she will be scared, Hannah added, and then laughed. Her laughter was like a bell, and the branches of flowers trembled slightly. Lorraine rolled his eyes helplessly, dropped the curtains, and returned to his desk. News from your line. His words were rambling, but Hannah nodded as if it was a matter of course. Since arriving in the New World, Lorraine's business has taken on many shady aspects, including Leonard's oversight of the two branch chambers, particularly the Caribbean, Carmen's smuggling operations in New Orleans, and Catalina's piracy intelligence. This information would flow to Lorraine through the branch chamber's commercial channels, but never directly to Pierce. But as Pierce's values became increasingly apparent, Lorraine began to worry that being too close to the dark side would harm the youngster's healthy development. After all, knowing and understanding something is vastly different from handling it personally. So, this time back in Lucy, Lorraine, under the pretext of Pierce's lack of academic work, forced him to compile a mountain of nautical literature in French, Spanish, and Latin, demanding that he use it to decipher the Count of Gévaudan's logbook and begin his formal training in fleet command. Little Pierce was busy, dizzy, and constantly on the go. Minor tasks like picking up and sending things off naturally had to be passed on to others, and Hannah was the one who took on that responsibility. Hannah was an assassin, a family with a long history, specializing in handling shady business for their employers. Because of her specialized expertise, even though this was her first time handling paperwork, she handled it with ease, showing no signs of awkwardness. And today was the first time she had taken the initiative to report to Lorraine. Lorraine glanced at the spotless desk. What would you like to drink? Tea. It's not tea time yet. Milk tea will do, no jam or pastries. True to Hannah's style, Lorraine stood up to make her tea. The type of tea didn't matter, what mattered was how much milk and sugar it contained, demonstrating the importance of cultivating a good taste from a young age and the importance of first-hand experience. When the tea was ready, Hannah took a sip and moaned contentedly like a kitten. The first is news from the branch. Leonard was worried we might leave Lucy, so he sent a briefing. The details will probably reach McCarthy within a week or two. The colonial authorities of Britain, France, and the Netherlands have begun negotiations at the Royal Pontifical University of San Jerónimo in Havana, with Spain, Portugal, and Denmark acting as intermediaries. The main topic is the post-war order in the Caribbean, and it has been made clear that North American issues will not be involved. In addition, the Le François tragedy is also a focus of these negotiations. As eyewitnesses of the tragedy, Count Gévaudan of the frigate, Sir Allender of Le François, Lieutenant Colonel Nelson, and Captain Leshat have been asked to attend and speak on the relevant topics. Leonard attached Chuck's evaluation, saying that the Chamber of Commerce might also be invited at the end of the negotiations. Lorraine smiled and nodded. The Chamber of Commerce will definitely be invited, but not as representatives of mercenaries to present themselves in court. Instead, they will be thanked as enthusiastic businessmen who cooperated with the Royal Navy in humanitarian aid. This is related to the dignity of a powerful country, but by then, we'll probably have gone to the Amazon to look for the crystal skull. I'll leave a letter for Chuck later, asking him to represent the Chamber of Commerce and bring back a generous thank you gift. Hina remained non-committal about the so-called skull, taking 2 sips of tea before moving on to the second story. Leonard again. Regarding last month's branch financial report and this month's forecast, are there any questions? Hina frowned, reflecting for a moment. Last month, we made a profit of £1,361, primarily due to the opening of ocean-going vessels in Northwest Europe. While not a significant amount, it significantly boosted Caribbean profits. Northwest Europe wasn't affected as much as the Caribbean, with profits of £4,866, an 8% increase from the previous month. Lorraine looked at Hina curiously as she spoke the numbers. Isn't it wonderful that the branches are thriving? Of course, rising performance is good, Hina said, gulping down the rest of her tea. But this month, Leonard predicts the Caribbean branch will run a significant deficit because Chuck Parker withdrew a large sum. The total amount is £15,000, of which £8,300 were paid to the Levisler Dockyard and £3,900 were paid to the Royal Port Naval Logistics Department. This is the cost of repairing the ship, and there is no problem with it. But in addition, Parker also paid £1,000 to a woodcarver named Earl Weiss, £1,500 to Director Stanley of the Port Authority, and £300 for business banquets. After investigation, it was found that they were also related to the Port Authority, and none of them were accounted for. Woodcarver and Port Authority. Lorraine touched his chin and thought for a long time, and suddenly laughed bitterly. I guessed what he was going to do. What? Modify the bow image, remove the hull number, mass number and other marks. If my guess is correct, he also plans to fabricate a batch of ship transaction records out of thin air, and complete the registration of the new ship's entry into the port. Hina tilted her head in confusion. The purpose of doing this, of course, it's to turn those French warships into second-hand ships with clear origins, confirm the account of their sinking in the battle report, and by the way, prevent the emergence of pragmatists in Fort-de-France who hold the right to trade but lack gentlemanly manners. A superfluous move? Not really a superfluous move. Do you think it will be useful? You can't deceive the known, and you don't care about the unknown. Lorraine snorted disdainfully. It's just a great country. Chuck's behavior provides Fort-de-France with a good excuse. The defense fleet was destroyed by the Halloween fleet with 7 warships after a fierce battle, not by a mere 100 light artillery pieces. Hannah suddenly realized, it actually sounds like a good favor. From a business point of view, it's naturally perfect, but Chuck's business style has always been confident, sharp, and decisive. This is good, but sometimes he considers timing and cost-effectiveness too much, so he easily puts himself in a position where he has to gamble everything. Like this time, including the Golden Deer, we brought back a total of 5 ships, all valuable ocean-going vessels. The Golden Deer and Totem need major repairs, while the Golden Deer and Andes need more firepower, but the Caribbean branch's financial situation isn't great. Because it was established so recently and there were not enough ships in the early stages, reserves have always been tight. What's more, Chuck has never stopped expanding. The Caribbean branch is now more like a hollow box, relying entirely on Chuck's management skills to maintain profitability. So there's a problem. Lorraine drew a circle on the desk. Last month, Ramos wrote to say that Chuck borrowed £20,000 from the Northwest European branch while negotiating an ocean voyage. This shows that his reserves are already insufficient. At least compared to his development plan, cash has become a weak link. At this time, his most reliable approach should be to prioritize the operation of new ships with low maintenance costs, and to repair and supply them in batches and stages, but he wants to curry favor with me, so he can't delay the Golden Deer. He doesn't want to miss the rare opportunity to curry favor with France, so he has increased a lot of non-transactional expenses. The most troublesome thing is that he wants to open the Caribbean branch's own ocean channels in one go, and as a result, even the repair of the Totem and the replenishment of the Andes have to be carried out simultaneously. £15,000 is a huge sum of money for the current Caribbean branch, which is equivalent to draining his reserves again. Lack of cash means that the Chamber of Commerce will lose its flexibility, and its stability and risk resistance will become weakened, so that it can't withstand any storm. Hannah didn't quite understand all this, but just by looking at Lorraine's expression, she knew that this matter was of great importance. Are you going to intervene? It would be great if I could. Lorraine spread his hands helplessly. I promised him that I would only send someone to supervise the accounts and not interfere with the specific operations. Of course I can break the contract, but that would risk Chuck's alienation. At this stage, it's not worth it. It would be a good idea to prepare a secret reserve fund with Leonard, but unfortunately Chuck has no money, and neither do I. The investment in New Orleans and Lorraine eventually turned into ships. We are out of cash and are on par with Chuck. What about the ancient gold artifacts? The conversion of ancient gold artifacts into money requires a specific time and environment. The Caribbean is not Europe. There are only a few auctions of sufficient standards here in a year, and we can participate in, probably not even one. In other words, you are actually stumped by money. That expression, that tone, they were obviously discussing serious matters, but Lorraine clearly heard Henna's teasing. He glared at Henna fiercely. Tisk, the descendants of Nile will never be helpless. It's the end of June. When will the damn smuggling be ready? In fact, the third thing I want to tell you, Henna playfully pulled out a private letter with a rose pattern from her bosom. Carmen's letter. Lorraine's eyes lit up. Prepared. This batch of goods was fully warehousing and inventoried 3 days ago. The letter arrived this morning. Carmen urged us to go there quickly. Lorraine almost cheered out loud. He was happy for a moment, thought for a moment, and then hesitated again. Henna walked over and hugged him gently. Belgidia, smuggling, fighting shack. Lorraine leaned on Henna's arms and murmured, should I take him with me? Chapter 228, Island Love Story. 3 months into her employment, Miss Anyue felt she was finally acclimating to the life of a pretentious English butler. To that end, she even asked the affable Vice President Leonard for a loan of a genuine English butler. Mr. Ferguson was a leading expert in aristocratic lifestyle management. He had received auditing education from a young age, starting as a stable boy and moving through positions like kitchen assistant, gardener, tailor, footman, secretary, and art steward. It took him 30 years to rise to the position of second butler of the Parker family, responsible for accompanying Sir Parker on his overseas assignments and caring for his daily needs. After hearing this resume, any discerning butler would have known that Mr. Ferguson was the instructor Chuck had chosen for Anyue. But Anyue had no idea, absolutely no idea. So, from the very first day they met, Mr. Ferguson had concluded that Anyue would not be a top-tier butler. But how could he explain it? Miss Anyue was beautiful, naturally charming, and possessed an intellectual face that perfectly suited her glasses. Many nouveau riche lacking in experience couldn't appreciate the beauty of a top-notch butler. In contrast, it was Miss Anyue's type who attracted them. Wasn't the adventurous, pagan Mr. Drake a typical nouveau riche from the sea? All the mysteries were solved. Mr. Ferguson, believing he saw everything, quickly devised a study plan for Miss Anyue, emphasizing performance, manners, and grace, while foregoing any advanced professional skills. He discovered that Miss Anyue was an exceptionally quick learner and surprisingly knowledgeable. She mastered skills like gardening, livestock, cooking, tailoring, personnel management, and accounting almost instantly, and could apply them to other situations. However, she was hopelessly lacking in taste and the ability to read people's expressions. Miss Anyue quickly grasped the principle of the English butler, simply, take. She mastered her voice, her posture, her body, her expression. These so-called essential skills were identical to what she'd learned while running the inn. As for the boring stuff left, it was just memorization. A month later, master and apprentice parted ways, each feeling their lives had been well spent, their goals perfectly achieved. Miss Orphy had ascended. Facing the slaves on the plantation, she floated like a god. Facing the farmhands, she descended like a saint. With the Indian servants, she was no longer irritable, speaking softly. And with her white peers, she was gentle and charming, her smile warm and inviting. Her status on the estate soared, no longer facing pushback or alienation, but only warmth and respect. If that were the case, that would be wonderful. Well, to be fair, the plantation was quite close to Miss Orphy's expectations. However, Lucy Manor differed somewhat from the traditional English manor, lacking the rigid, established hierarchy and even less the necessary discipline and restraint. The Indians treated this place like a tribe. Besides diligently completing their work, they loved to celebrate and sing. They also preferred to avoid Miss Anyue, because, whether they chattered or whispered, she would forbid them from doing anything. Struggle was a joy. They admitted they didn't dislike this straightforward Irish girl. Her presence made them cherish the celebration and singing even more. It was like being in the jungle, surrounded by predators. The dreadful feeling of peril and the prospect of interruption. Furthermore, Miss Anyue never criticized them too harshly, for she clearly disliked the disengaged whites more than the cheerful Indians. Father Dillon, who loved fishing, Father Hill, who loved sleeping, and Father Bardo, who loved drinking, the Indian servants privately referred to them as Butler McCarthy's three hells. Every trip to the dock was a nightmare for Miss Anyue, and that feeling remained constant, whether before, during, or after her ascension. The three old men constantly stared at her with their murky eyes, ignoring her and acting half dead. Of course, This wasn't a personal attack on her. Many who made things uncomfortable with them, including Mr. Ferguson, who managed her demonstration staff, and the distinguished President Parker, had been turned away with this silent scorn. When Lorraine was away, the only exceptions were Vice President Leonard and Vice Admiral Orvis, who had shared the past. This left Miss Orphy feeling particularly lonely. Isolated on the island of the Manor, where the only civilized people treated her as a different species, Miss Orphy experienced this philosophical loneliness. Fortunately, the affable Vice President Leonard once again came to her aid. At the end of May, the number of white people at the Manor suddenly increased, not because of the return of Lorraine and his crew, but because Vice President Leonard had welcomed the families of the three Hells. 3 families, 10 new members, Dylan's wife and 2 daughters, Hill's wife and 2 sons and 1 daughter, and Bardot's wife and 2 children. 3 beautiful red-roofed, white-walled buildings had been erected on a sunny slope not far from the dock, transforming the estate into a dazzling spectacle overnight. The 3 wives were all kind, simple, and capable. Upon arrival, they immediately accepted the work at the estate from AOF, doing what they could. More importantly, they all had loud voices and were protective of AOF, forcing even the most outspoken Dylan to be humble and cautious in their presence. The children's stay at the estate was short. On their 3rd day, both boys and girls packed their belongings and prepared to travel to Kingston for school enrollment. AOF had never heard of the Drake Chamber of Commerce's own technical school, where sailors with long-term contracts like the 3 Hells could enroll 1 child free of charge. However, they all chose to pay for all their children's enrollment, believing that even if not all of their children aspired to work for the Chamber of Commerce school was their best option. Graduates from the Drake Chamber of Commerce were able to join ships directly, while girls could enter trading houses. The bright and studious could easily secure recommendations from prominent figures, earning them admission to their chosen universities with a high school diploma recognized throughout Europe. This was the hope Lorraine sowed for his core employees. The cost was modest, but the effort was truly moving. Consequently, most of the children at the Drake Chamber of Commerce lived a busy life, returning home only 2 days a week, often due to distance, schoolwork, and other factors. Despite this, AOF was fortunate to meet her first close-in-age same-sex friend. Monica, Dylan's eldest daughter, shared AOF's independent and strong character. At 20, she was only slightly older, interested in literature, music, and theology. After graduating from the Chamber of Commerce School's short-term program, she voluntarily forego further studies and remained at the school as a teaching assistant. This time, as an adult, she had no need to come to the new world. It was simply because the Kingston branch school was newly established, and the newly appointed teachers needed a group of experienced teaching assistants to assist them. She had received a high recommendation from Southampton, and under the guise of a work transfer, she was reunited with her family. Miss AOF liked her very much. Being of the same sex, the same age, and able to confide in each other, sharing many hidden troubles and secrets, this feeling was charming and unfamiliar to AOF, and she was addicted. She knew that half of the new light in this manor came from Monica, and the other half came from her increasingly successful work and the 3 beautiful houses on the sunny slope. Maybe I could build a house like this there, instead of living in this empty villa, AOF thought, walking out of the manor with a cheerful yet reserved manner. It was the weekend, and the children would be home at noon, and Monica would be home too. Picking up the children was part of the teaching assistant's job, and it was convenient for her both at home and in private. Orphy also had to go to the gate to greet the children, because unlike employees, welcoming guests was a housekeeper's job. Greeting Monica was also a boon for Orphy, both personally and professionally. As she left the villa, she suddenly heard a whimsical call from the veranda. "Hey, Cranky," Orphy's brows twitched. "Ah, starving ghost." Bell, who had been waiting for a long time, rolled his eyes and straightened up from the eaves. "Cranky, are you going? By the way, it's the weekend, so you should pick up the kids again. From what you're saying, do I think you're doubting my ability to do my job?" "Not at all." Bell waved his hands in frustration. "If not, bye." With a goodbye, Orphy turned and walked away. Bell hadn't expected that his opening remarks, which had lasted over half an hour, would be followed by a knife slashing his throat. He instinctively gave chase, quickly sprinting to reach Orphy. Bad temper, Miss Orphy braked, backed away, kneeled, shielded her chest, and nodded, wary. "What are you doing?" Bell regained consciousness, backed away, kneeled, chest puffed, scratched his head, a look of regret. Well, anyway, his eyes flicked around, then suddenly lit up. I see the neckline of your dress is a little droopy. Coincidentally, while I was secretly operating in Martinique, I bought a brooch from a good shop. If you don't mind, wouldn't the weight of the brooch make the neckline droop more? Belle was at a loss for words. Gritting her teeth, she pulled a palm-sized gilded rose from her pocket and handed it to Orphe. Anyway, put it on. I think it suits you well. Orphe took it suspiciously, flattening it in her palm to examine it carefully. The brooch had a certain weight to it, the flower was large, and the workmanship was exquisite, though the material wasn't particularly good. This means that it is very likely a gift carefully selected from a small shop in a small place. It may not be expensive, but it carries the sincere thoughts of the chooser. But, why give it to me? Aoi lowered her eyes in confusion and saw her chest. Today's dress is rose-colored. With a beautiful wide collar, which just reveals half of her wide and bright breasts, showing off her proud charm as a woman. But as Belle said, the tailor's treatment of the neckline is a bit loose, and it cannot fit the ups and downs of the chest well, which is somewhat imperfect. Weight? Heavy brooch, loose neckline. Miss Aoife's face suddenly changed, and she raised her hand and threw the brooch far away. Frivolous. Vulgar. Shameless. Aren't you ashamed? Humph. Chapter 229 Sleeping Potion. As expected. I've been hated from the beginning. Dinner in the magnificent restaurant had long since ended. The dazzling tableware had long since been cleared away. The sailors were busy with their own tasks. Even the diligent Aoife had finished her shift and, taking advantage of her rare evening break, had gone to Zhangjiangpo to chat with her beloved girlfriend. Only Lorraine and Belle remained in the restaurant, the two of them alone. But from another perspective, it was also fortunate that the unruly Aoife was gone. Belle, frustrated by her first love, could freely vent her frustration, howling one heartbreaking sob after another. The candle was already half burned. Lorraine scratched her ears in embarrassment, confused as to how she had ended up providing emotional counseling to a lost, frustrated young man. Even though he had been the one who had brought Belle's vague feelings to light, and the progress of the counseling was closely related to the Chamber of Commerce's business, he was the president, wasn't he? The president of the Chamber of Commerce, the all-powerful chairman, the helmsman of a commercial giant. Don't these boss-level figures usually stand high and mighty, creating problems and demanding progress, then stand by and watching over the consequences without letting anyone know what's happening? Clearly, the Drake Chamber of Commerce is simply too small. Lorraine sighed regretfully, rapped on the table, and offered gentle comfort. Belle, that's too ugly, but you're my childhood friend. Belle peeled off his face from the table and looked at Lorraine with a desperate look. If I don't allow you to see my ugly face, are you going to let my dear sister see it? Lorraine's brow furrowed in frustration. I've noticed you always mention your sister at inappropriate times. Once when you sold me your maritime commuter, once when you came to me, and again today. Could this be some way of masking your guilt? How could that be? My sister is the bond of our friendship, and the comfort of my soul. It's natural to think of the angels at home in times of weakness, just as the Puritans always embraced God on their dying moments. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation, but Lorraine didn't realize he'd inadvertently touched upon the truth and easily let this rare insight slip. He gathered his composure, choosing his words. Belle, girls always have strange reading comprehension problems. Only scumbags like Atcherin can perfectly express their feelings to them. Normal people are like you, failure after failure, ups and downs. Really, look at me. I'm a millionaire, highly skilled, cultured, knowledgeable, tasteful, handsome, successful, prestigious, with a ship and beautiful female crew members, and yet I'm still single. Belle seemed to have suddenly discovered something new. When you said that, I realized that your life is much more of a failure than mine. If you don't want to die, shut up. Lorraine took a few deep breaths. There's an old Eastern proverb that goes, wine in the sorrowful heart makes the sorrow worse. It means that alcohol is the most beautiful creation in the world. It can heal emotional wounds, strengthen the soul, and make the heart no longer fragile, able to withstand wind and rain. Belle's face was full of suspicion. 7 syllables can express such a complex meaning. Oriental. Lorraine waved his hand impatiently. How about a try? Drink. Lorraine rang the bell to call the Indian maid on duty. Fenrir, go to my study and get that bottle of treasured Bushmills whiskey, and bring a bucket of ice in 2 glasses. Thank you. After a while, Fenrir prepared the relevant things on the dining table. Bell looked at the amber wine in front of him greedily, his voice trembling slightly. This is the legendary Bushmills, the world's oldest whiskey distillery, established in 1608. It's the origin and holy land of all whiskeys. You have something like this. I'm a businessman, Lorraine said nonchalantly, spreading his hands. As you know, I'm the most popular businessman these days. The crystal clear liquor poured into the glass, and the ice cubes, frozen into the shape of shamrocks, crackled with a crisp sound, creating a unique visual experience. Lorraine continued, whiskey originated from the brewing techniques of Irish missionaries, so it pairs perfectly with shamrocks. For brandy, I like to pair it with lily ice, mixed with cleanly peeled lily petals, to bring a French wine tasting experience to a foreign land. Damn capital, Bell roared with a proletarian fury, raised his hand, and drank the whole thing in one gulp. Huh? This liquor is so strong, clang. Bell fell headfirst onto the soft carpet, and Lorraine's expression suddenly turned cold. Daniel Solander walked in from outside the restaurant with an expressionless face. He laid Bell flat on his back, took his breathing and temperature, listened to his heartbeat for a moment, and carefully examined Bell's skin before nodding slightly to Lorraine. Lorraine played with a wine glass in front of him. How long can the effect of the drug last? Based on the Royal Alchemy Society's 227 human experiments, this dose of medicine can bring Judah a short sleep of 7 days and a long sleep of 9 days, with no special records. Will his body functions be affected from the 7th to the 9th? It's a mixture of moss powder produced in the caves of Northern Ireland and hallucinogenic mushrooms from Central Africa. This sleeping drug is different from ordinary sleeping drugs. It does not cause a coma, but a high fever-like symptom. About 4 hours later, he will enter a trance, unable to distinguish his environment, unable to wake up, but will subconsciously maintain physiological needs. After waking up, there will be no residual sequelae except a certain degree of weakness. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. Like a high fever, hallucinations, confusion, inability to correctly respond to stimuli, inability to form effective memories. That's about it. It seems I need to take some time to learn about alchemy. Lorraine sighed. Speaking of which, do you have a lot of strange materials like this? I have a stockpile of relatively common, easily portable, and readily available specialty products unavailable in the Americas. This is primarily because many alchemical preparations have medicinal value. For example, sleeping potions are also very suitable sedatives. Lorraine agreed with his approach. Admittedly, the sleeping potion used on Bell was certainly far less than the tranquilizers of later generations, but in this era of medical scarcity and the reliance on feces and urine for remedies, they are truly holy remedies and magical potions. Even at a higher cost, they are a category worth exploring and enriching. With this in mind, Lorraine said to Daniel, I believe you are well suited to using the Chamber of Commerce's channels to support your alchemical skills. Now that ocean trade has been established, the Chamber of Commerce will do its best to assist you with procurement and transportation, and should also cover a portion of the costs. At this stage, I believe £100 per month is a suitable amount. Having joined the flagship for over 6 months, Daniel's face showed a distinct expression for the first time. He was surprised. I thought, with your pragmatism, I'd need more proof before I could be granted this privilege. I can tell whether something has value or not. Lorraine smiled. Of course, I'm prepared to lose everything. According to common estimates, you must have a lot of formulas and experiments, but there are probably only a few that a mere mortal like me can see as practical, like the sleeping potion. I have to say, your words don't sound like someone who knows nothing about alchemy. Flattering each other is a waste of precious time. Lorraine stood up. Since even Bell is ready, notify everyone, it's time to explore the Maya. P.S. Whiskey, according to alcohol history, missionaries introduced distilling technology to Ireland around 432 AD, but there's no definitive evidence, and this history is highly controversial in Europe. However, the fact that distilling technology was later introduced to Scotland by Irish missionaries actually lends some credibility to the previous account. In the British Isles, the first distilled spirit made from grain didn't appear in recorded history until 1494. This was the famous water of life, known as Usibitha in Welsh, Ustbitha in Irish, and Esquiba in English, all derived from the Latin aqua vitae. In 1556, barley-brewed water of life appeared in Irish parliamentary records. In 1608, the Bushmills distillery was registered. In 1618, the word Ust acquired its own meaning, eventually evolving into the modern-day whiskey. Therefore, the true history of whiskey can be traced back to 1618. As the earliest whiskey distillery, Bushmills predates the creation of alcoholic beverages by 10 years. Furthermore, bourbon, a mainstream whiskey, wasn't produced until 1789 by a Kentucky minister. This spirit wasn't made from traditional barley, but from hominy, a staple of the local Indian diet. Having written this, I'm tempted to offer a quip. Is it possible that so many people believe in God that they produce drunken swordsmen? Otherwise, why is the history of wine always inseparable from religious people? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230 Lots of Gold. On the sunny slope of Lucy Manor, near the dock, 3 neatly decorated red-roofed buildings create a striking new scene. They are the residences of the manor's 3 dock managers. It's the weekend, and the place is far from quiet as usual. Children's laughter overflows from every corner, and lights of reunion flicker between every window. Aoife is trying out Monica's makeup. She sits upright at Monica's dressing table, letting Monica manipulate her pretty face. The young women huddle together, shouting and laughing at the strange results. Having laughed and played enough, Aoife lies on Monica's bed, her hair disheveled. Monica, hugging the back of the chair, looks at her with ill intent. "Offie, I heard that you lost the gift Mr. Judea gave you today." "Huh?" Offie sat up in shock from his dying illness. "You? How did you hear that? Did you forget? I will be a tutor at the manor on weekends, responsible for teaching the Indians to read. I am an independent employee." "Oh. Those lowly ones, you are swearing, Madam Housekeeper." Monica smiled cunningly. "Offie, teach me how to capture the heart of an outstanding man." "Outstanding? Heart?" Offie's blushing face was full of dullness. "Monica, have you been misled by something strange, such as Indians?" Monica was even more confused than Offie. "You are, my friend. Don't you think Mr. Judea is outstanding? He is less than 20 years old and is already a core sailor of Drake. He directly enjoys shares of the Chamber of Commerce and has a status similar to that of a board member. I heard from my father that he used to serve in the Navy and was a major before he retired. The president praised him as the best helmsman in the world. It was because of his talent that he went to great lengths to dig him out of the Navy. This man is really starving." Monica felt like she was going crazy. "Then tell me, what kind of impression do you have of him?" "Dirty, smelly, dirty-mouthed, and evil-minded. He can spend £100 on a meal, and he has no virtues at all. He relies on his relationship with the master to live a life of idleness and waiting to die on the ship. He is a scoundrel among scoundrels." "Are you serious?" Aoife tilted his head and thought seriously. "Maybe, birds of a feather flock together. The pagan master has the worst heart and a vicious brain blessed by the devil, and the people who gather around him are all weirdos. The sarcastic children, the sneaky and evil witches, and the Frenchman who brings a different woman back to the manor every day, and the barber who is always mixing strange potions. Ms. Yesla is the only one who is different from them, upright and heroic, but it's a pagan, and black, no, Egyptian." For the first time, Monica doubted her good friend's vision of people. "Aoife, may I ask, what kind of person do you think I am?" "You? Very good, I like you very much." "It's not that kind of comment. It's more like what I said before, a little more sarcastic. Why do you suddenly want to hear me scold you? I never curse, even if I mean it." Before she could finish her sentence, she suddenly heard a faint, sharp whistle drifting in the air, one short, sharp whistle after another. It suddenly dawned on her that she hadn't seen that annoying Dylan tonight. Even Bardo, who liked to sit by the door drinking, and Hill, who liked to sleep on the roof, were nowhere to be seen. 3 annoying old men had disappeared while they weren't on duty. But the 3 ladies hadn't shown a single suspicion. This meant. Orf jumped up. "Monica, where's your father?" "Father?" Monica was stunned. "I think my mother said the president is planning a night sail tonight. They must be going to command the Karen out of port, right?" "Ah. That evil pagan. He's running away again." The long, narrow dock was a scene of bustle. People came and went, carrying and pushing things. Lorraine's impromptu decision to embark on the smuggling operation was met with no panic from anyone at the Lucy estate. That afternoon, the carrier pigeon, a 2-rigged cage clipper used exclusively for correspondence, was the first to depart the Lucy fishing port. This small, former shrimp boat, just over 5 meters long and manned by 4 sailors, could sail and paddle, averaging 7 knots in all wind conditions, with a maximum speed approaching 14 knots. At this rate, she could reach New Orleans in less than 2 days, and could deliver the letter to Carmen as early as tomorrow evening. That evening, the Karen was ready to set sail. The Karen was the large sloop that had previously escorted Lorraine. It was 15 meters long and could carry a crew of 20, with a minimum crew of 6. This type of vessel is known for its stability in all wind conditions, with moderate speed, steering, and seakeeping capabilities. It requires a small crew and boasts a spacious cabin. Most often, this type of vessel was used as a fishing vessel along the continental shelf. It was considered the cheapest of the offshore fishing vessels, yet also the shabbiest, least likely to inspire plunder. Lorraine, drawn to its humble yet adaptable nature, used it as a ferry boat, connecting the Jackdaw and Lucy Manor, providing transportation between the 2 bases. This allowed Lorraine to control the location of his disguise at sea. Lorraine Drake would not appear in any form within Edward's territory, and the future smuggler Edward Kenway would have no connection with the young English merchant. At around 9 p.m., Lorraine, Henna, Pierce, Noah, Acheron, Daniel, and the unconscious Belle appeared. Dylan ran up, whistling, stole a glance at Belle lying on the cart, and stood at attention. "President, the Karen can be prepared in half an hour, and the ship is expected to be ready to leave port by 10 a.m. at the latest." Lorraine smiled apologetically. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. "We apologize for the inconvenience. We deeply apologize for not being ready to leave port immediately. I can't blame you." Lorraine waved her hand. "Prepare a spacious cabin for Daniel and Belle. They'll stay together." Yes, the instructions were simple. Discuss the destination with the Karen's captain, get Belle and Daniel aboard light cargo, and the rest of the crew rest in the dock hut, awaiting the final preparations for sailing. However, before the sailing preparations were complete, the anxious Aoife burst into the hut. "Good heavens, sir, you're trying to escape again." "What do you mean by escape?" Lorraine rolled her eyes. "Aoife, British butlers don't rush around like you. That must be because they haven't encountered a sir who could leave without saying goodbye." Aoife gasped. "Sir," as, clang. Monica and Dylan rushed into the cabin one after another. Seeing a room full of sailors killing time by themselves and Lorraine and Aoife arguing with each other, they all rubbed their hands awkwardly. Aoife was surprised. "Monica, what are you doing here?" Lorraine continued depressedly. "The assistant teacher is probably worried that I will behave improperly with my housekeeper." As for the dock manager, Dylan snapped to attention and saluted. "I am worried that my daughter will disturb the president's elegance." "See, that's it." Lorraine spread his hands helplessly. Aoife and Monica blushed with embarrassment. Monica waved her hands repeatedly. "No, President, I was trying to stop Aoife." "Why stop her?" "Because." Aoife raised her hand to stop Monica from saying anything, then looked back at Lorraine with righteous indignation. "Master, as the liaison between the General Chamber of Commerce and the branch chambers, I have an obligation to remind you to keep your position clear at all times. It's your responsibility to keep your subordinates in touch. I think as a capitalist who pays everyone a salary, I have the right to act arbitrarily." "No. Paying salaries is your obligation, as is making decisions on critical issues, but I've entrusted the affairs of the branch to President Chuck Parker and Vice President Leonard. Except for a few matters that affect the branch's survival, they can make the final decision, but there are still a few matters that affect the branch's survival, right? President Parker may be annoying, but there's one thing I agree with: in the face of capital, no one is free." Yatrin whistled in appreciation. Lorraine glared at him resentfully, turned back, and pretended to be lost in thought. After a delay of more than a minute, Lorraine raised her head. "Miss McCarthy." "Aoife, I'm talking to the contact, not my housekeeper." Aoife puffed up her cheeks angrily, but finally accepted the change of address. Lorraine cleared his throat and continued, "First of all, congratulations on successfully convincing me. Secondly, I regret to tell you that your request is unreasonable." Aoife had a bad feeling. "Why?" "Because," Lorraine dragged out a long tone, "even I don't know where I will go next." "Huh? The Amazon jungle is very large, and the Mayans once built a great civilization there. I want to find their pyramids, but even if I find them, I can't guarantee that that is the Feather Temple I'm looking for, so I don't know where I will go at all." "Feather? Feather what?" "Feather Temple," Lorraine waved his hands. The Mayans believed in the sun and believed that a strange snake with bird feathers was the messenger of the sun. They built pyramid-shaped temples to worship it, and the offerings were gold, lots and lots of gold. Aofi was stunned when he heard it, and subconsciously agreed, a lot of gold, a lot of gold. Just when Lorraine was almost at a loss for words, Hill's report came from outside the door. President, Karen can leave the port? Great. Lorraine picked up the belt with a long sword from the wall and said to Orphe with a smile, when we find the temple, I'll have Belle bring you the feather god statue. It's a deal. The sailors, grinning, filed out with Lorraine. Only after they were gone did Orphe react. Wait? You still didn't tell me where you were going. And why did you have to give it to me like a starving ghost? Naturally, no one paid her any attention. Late at night, the sounds of nature filled Lucy. The cries and responses of ships leaving the harbor echoed nearby, lingering around the cabin for a long time. Monica stared at her furious friend in amazement. Orphe. In every way, you're an amazing girl, really. P.S. Karen, the ferryman of the Styx, son of the goddess of night and the god of darkness, brother of the god of day and the god of space, the only concrete thing in an abstract family. It was clear that he was definitely not a biological child. Chapter 231 Crow's Nest. Captured the lighthouse, requesting pilotage, light-sighted, lower sails, slow down and enter the channel, stand by the poles. The Karen is entering the reef. The Karen was sailing through a reef, its destination a kilometer away, a treacherous beach. That was also the property of the Drake Chamber of Commerce. The last time they went out to sea for smuggling, the Karen and the Jackdaw hadn't been connected in this way. They met off Little Cayman, and Lorraine completed the transfer in disguise at sea. But this time was more complicated than before. Lorraine waited too long for news from Carmen, having decided to sail as soon as she heard the news, so her reply never reached her. Lucy was still some distance from New Orleans, and the Karen wasn't a fast, independent ship. Crossing half the pirate-infested Caribbean would take time and couldn't guarantee Lorraine's safety. After all, he was a wealthy merchant with a fortune worth hundreds of thousands, and the lives of hundreds of people depended on him. No matter how headstrong and adventurous he might be, he had reached an age when he needed to understand the difference between frivolity and audacity. Taking a ship like the Karen to New Orleans? Little Cayman was a more suitable rendezvous point. For one thing, despite its isolation, the Cayman Islands remained a British colony. This meant that the vast expanse of waters from Jamaica to the Cayman Islands, exclusively controlled by Britain, was far calmer and safer than the rest of the Caribbean, where power was in a complex web of power. Pirates risking the Royal Navy to attack here could only be because the prey was juicy, not because they were craving fish but didn't feel like fishing. Another factor was geography. Little Cayman lay between Grand Cayman and Cayman Brac, smack in the middle of the island chain's protrusion and relatively close to the Yucatan Channel, which leads to the Gulf of Mexico. This island was a necessary stop on the route from Jamaica to New Orleans. As a midway point, it prevented the Jackdaw from entering British territory, effectively reducing its exposure. This was a crucial solace for the British sailors, who inevitably felt guilty about their crimes. All of this made Little Cayman a telephone booth for the Drakes. Clark Kent could use it to transform into Superman, and Lorraine Drake could use it to transform into Black Flag. However, they still faced a challenge. While disguises protected the Chamber of Commerce, they also created a gap in the itinerary. For example, in Lucia, Lorraine had found a suitable departure time. Any later and he might have been delayed by the Anglo-French negotiations in Havana. Any earlier and he would have been unable to complete his smuggling preparations in New Orleans. However, the decision to depart had to be conveyed to North America via a communication ship, and then the Jackdaw's arrival at Little Cayman would take 3 to 4 days. During this time, the Karen could not remain adrift in the perilous seas. Pirates, storms, passing sailors or merchants in a bad mood, the ocean presents numerous dangers, and the Karen is too weak. A suitable base must be prepared. Even if it's only operational for a short time, it will be the key to connecting Lorraine and Edward's two lives at a critical moment. So, from the moment the smuggling contract was signed, Leonard embarked on a secret mission, socializing with Cayman Islands gentlemen, selecting a location, and setting up a relay. This private beach, nestled deep in the reefs, is his achievement. Commercially speaking, it holds no tangible value. Located on the northwest coast of Little Cayman, it's steeped in reefs, with shallow, turbulent waters. But it boasts villas, a lighthouse, fresh water, a small private dock large enough for a sloop, and a pleasant coastal town over 10 kilometers away for basic supplies. No one pays much attention to this place. In reality, it was once a secret retreat for an English aristocrat, a retreat from the hustle and bustle of the world. Lorraine was delighted with the place. After receiving Leonard's secret letter, he commissioned him to exchange a set of ancient gold artifacts for ownership, naming it Crow's Nest Manor. He also instructed Kren to have everyone take care of the manor and keep it in a state of constant use. This was the first time Crow's Nest had been used since its acquisition. After half an hour in port, the Karen anchored. Lorraine and the others disembarked and scanned the tranquil seashore under the stars and moon. When I retire, it seems like a place like this wouldn't be bad, Lorraine stretched comfortably. Atrin spat in disdain. After I retire, I'm going to live back in Paris. Life without prosperity is meaningless. Pierce rolled his eyes at Atrin. Even I know what you mean by that. Is that life without women is meaningless? Tisk, you're still young, Tisk, old man. Lorraine scratched his head in embarrassment. After the heart arsonist operation, relations between the two collaborators, whose age gaps were so different, remained strained. Even Lorraine couldn't figure out what their beef was, or whether they were simply incompatible, and their actions had inadvertently crossed the line between strangers and friends, suddenly becoming mutually disliked. Henna stalked over to Lorraine on the beach. Should I warn to say? He's older, he should do more to maintain peace on the ship. Lorraine thought for a moment, then shook her head. Little Pierce has had so many mentors growing up. Having Atrin will be good for him. Even if he doesn't learn to compromise, he'll learn that people are different. Meanwhile, Daniel, pushing the hapless Belle down the plank road, finally arrived. He dropped Belle's stroller and, like a spell, took a deep breath, reflecting on himself. There's a scent of abstinence in the air. I'm guessing we can find a potion here. If we distill it, it should have an impotent effect. Impotence, Atrin and Pierce exclaimed in unison, horrified. Life at Jackdaw Manor was peaceful. The so-called impotence potion was, of course, Daniel's illusion. He'd collected over 60 kinds of produce from the docks over the past few days, but ultimately failed to produce a potent potion. It was only to Belle's chagrin, as he suffered from a high fever, delirium, and unconsciousness. The Karen unloaded Lorraine and the others' luggage and the estate supplies before departing. 3 days later, a speedboat slowly approached the shore. Aboard were few people, but at the head of the boat were the long-missed Kren and Wang Yi. Wang Yi smiled brightly. My dear captain, without the great Cantonese cuisine, have you found anything to eat these days? I don't want to be too picky, but your Cantonese cuisine is the hard kind. As a paragon of forgetfulness, your French cuisine is far more delicious. Wang Yi smacked his lips. Forgetfulness. Captain, your Chinese is truly the biggest mystery of the Drake Chamber of Commerce. Perhaps. Lorraine was reluctant to delve into the subject and immediately changed the subject. Is the Jackdaw ready? A ship full of Charlevilles and dragoons, as well as some matching ammunition. I believe the Americans will fall in love with you at first sight, Captain, but they'll have to meet the Americans first. Lorraine turned around and saw the sailors carrying Belle out of the villa, placing him on a stretcher and taking him directly to the boat. Kren glanced at him curiously. Is that a new partner? Your childhood friend? The world's top helmsman mentioned in the letter. His identity is a bit complicated. To be responsible to you, I think I should first convict him of a crime before I can tell him the truth. Kren nodded in agreement. Among the sailors, Kren was known for his rigor and strictness, and Lorraine relied on him. He, Carmen, and Henna's opinions were always valued by Lorraine, and they were highly respected among the sailors. Seeing that he always supported her decisions, Lorraine smiled. The long rest is over, gentlemen and ladies. Are you ready for adventure? Chapter 232, Catering to His Interests. The North American smuggling route originating from the Cayman Islands was essentially the same as New Orleans, except for its longer distance. However, that wasn't the most favorable wind option. For efficiency reasons alone, Cayman Islands merchant ships should have simply sailed eastward along Cuba, through the Windward Channel, past the Bahamas, directly into the Atlantic winds, and then, using Bermuda as a stopover, ultimately reaching the west coast of North America. However, this was a clear dead end for the Jackdaw. As a smuggling ship laden with military aid, the Jackdaw had no choice but to take the long route, avoiding Sark's stronghold by circumventing the Yucatan Channel, circumnavigating Florida, and then snaking along the North American coastline between the peninsula and the Bahamas. And it couldn't get too close to the coastline. With General Clinton's advance south, the British forces in the southern 13 states felt for the first time the Royal Navy's unwavering care. The land front was intertwined, the coastal ports were rock solid, and the seas were completely dominated by the British. The more Lorraine studied this route, the more she understood why, despite the vast flow of gold beneath the surface, a stable smuggling operation was impossible. It was simply too treacherous. To protect his own interests, Count Galvez passed on numerous secrets to Lorraine through Carmen. Lorraine thus learned that while the French, the Friends of Freedom, single-handedly held back hundreds of ships from the powerful Royal Navy in the vast waters of the New World, their containment was extremely difficult. Along the Atlantic coast, the French Navy and the newly emerged American sampan fleet were pinned down and hammered by the sharks. While seemingly able to defend some strategic points, they were in reality defenseless in the vast expanse. France held a narrow advantage in the Gulf of Mexico, albeit a limited one. However, with the powerful deterrent power of its ally, Spain, they at least maintained the strategic initiative. The strategic balance in the Caribbean was easily shattered by the Battle of the Windward Islands. If it weren't for Sir Parker's concern for supporting the land forces and his unwillingness to fight to the death, the Gulf of Mexico could have been left isolated, a fact the French remained terrified of. Of the three great seas, two suffered losses, while one gained. The gains were only slight, while the losses were immense. Louis V was trying to persuade the First Parliament to send more warships to the New World, but France was already burdened financially by the American War of Independence, and further investment would be a long and arduous undertaking. As a messenger of French goodwill, Lorraine would be a lone warrior once he embarked on the smuggling route. I wonder if the Count wishes me to remain steadfast in my convictions or to retreat. Putting down the intelligence, Lorraine rubbed his brow in embarrassment. Carmen, who is our traitor in Baltimore, Mr. John Adams, a member of the Continental Congress? Carmen held the document but did not bow her head. He was a close friend and supporter of Mr. Washington, the commander of the Continental Army, a leader of federalism, a member of the drafting committee of the Declaration of Independence, and a member of the First and Second Continental Congresses. He was also a wealthy farmer, a good lawyer, a deist, and a Monophysite Christian. He was very loyal in love. He was married to his wife Abigail Smith for 15 years and had 3 sons and 2 daughters. They had a harmonious relationship. Politically, he advocated reducing the autonomy of each state, implementing central leadership, abolishing the Confederation, and establishing a federation. He and Commander Washington were close friends, but not political comrades. He had his own allies in politics, the most authoritative of whom was Mr. Hamilton, who was also a member of the Continental Congress and served as Mr. Washington's close military officer. He also had his own enemies, such as the famous academician Franklin and the new governor of Virginia, Mr. Jefferson. His political enemies speak highly of him, calling him a political tyrant, sharp, tough, simple, hot-tempered, pragmatic, and self-disciplined. Another point worth noting, his wife, Ms. Smith, is also a politician, and presumably a woman of women's liberation. She wrote to Mr. Adams while he was attending the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, reminding him to pay attention to protecting women's social status and rights during the meeting, otherwise it could trigger a second American Revolution. You'll likely meet her. Carmen knew exactly what Lorraine wanted. Information about a traitor far exceeded the needs of a single transaction. Lorraine frowned, pondering for a long time, then whispered, "The fact that a large farmer can be described as simple and self-disciplined shows that this gentleman's material desires are lower than those of ordinary people. Businessmen don't easily associate with such people. They tend to associate with an idealist with the temperament of a dictator, embracing justice and honor," Carmen reminded. "But this kind of person often despises women's rights, or at least doesn't pay too much attention to his assistants and companions, regardless of gender. You can focus on showing your own conceited personality, regardless of gender, so that as your assistant, I will have characteristics that will make the lady sympathize with me. What if that lady's position is different from your judgment and she is a pragmatist?" The letter she wrote to her husband can also be understood as using public opinion and personality to attract female supporters. After all, as a politician, she should know the power of those ladies in the boudoir, and she should know that in the environment in Philadelphia at the time, such forward-looking issues could not really attract attention and discussion. Carmen smiled brightly. "That's even better. A smart, useful, and underappreciated female assistant is the focus of her social life. She knows my value and will take the initiative to approach me." Lorraine stretched his arm comfortably. "Since you have thought about it, Prepare a gift for the lady. There should be some ancient, my captain, precious ancient gold isn't everything, at least not for the wife of a politician who prides herself on simplicity. Carmen winked playfully. I remember I have a theological treatise written by Isaac Newton. Since they're deists, I think it would make a fine gift, more than fine. Lorraine spread her hands. I'll write to Ramos as soon as possible to urge him to pay the first half's dividend. At least I won't leave my beautiful, shopping-loving staff officer without a clean purse. That's the best news, Mr. President. The Jackdaw's journey took several days. She rounded Cape Sable, crossed the Florida Straits, passed through the gap between West Palm Beach and Grand Bahama Island, then left the coast and carefully headed north along the edge of the continental shelf. Due to its geographical location, Hamilton Naval Base's sphere of influence is very wide, encompassing the vast coastline of the Bahamas, Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, the center of American independence. Shark possessed a formidable force. Even disregarding the Second Fleet on Newfoundland, also part of the Continental Squadron, he possessed over 30 warships of all classes, including the flagship Lion, the third-class Conqueror and Invigorating, and 9 fourth-class frigates. Judging solely by his strength, his fleet rivaled, if not surpassed, the might of Sir Parker assembled for the Battle of the Windward Islands. The knowledge that he single-handedly taught the French and American navies a lesson was undeniable. Furthermore, Lorraine knew that Shark's forte was large-scale maneuvering and coordinated defense by small formations of 2 or 3 warships. With a third or fourth-class ship at the core, these small formations, formed into complex circular movements, formed a defensive perimeter over a vast area, supporting each other without interfering with one another, and managing rotations, early warning, and close support. He was an unparalleled expert in such regional defense matters. Lorraine's late father, Elia Drake, once commented on his eldest son. Shark excelled at using numbers to bully the few and coerce the weak. With a fleet smaller than his, he wouldn't excel as a mediocre captain. But as the fleet grew in size and strength, his resilience multiplied. Though his talent skewed more defensive, he gave the enemy the impression of a giant python, his offensive performance no less impressive. Lorraine agreed with Elia's assessment. In his final 2 years at the Naval Academy, after completing most of the strategic and tactical courses, Lorraine and Shaq clashed on more than one map. Under equal conditions, Lorraine had an absolute winning rate with fewer than 3 ships. However, once the number of ships exceeded 6, each additional 3-ship unit made victory increasingly difficult, and even if he secured victory, it would come at a significant cost. And now, in this real-world confrontation, the Jackdaw was incapable of confronting any of Shaq's fleets head-on. A head-on encounter would guarantee certain death. All Lorraine could rely on was caution and luck. But think about it another way. While the conditions are different, the warships at sea are no longer pawns in Shaq's hands. In a complex circular defensive formation like this, how effective can the members of the Continental Squadron, who have just replaced the Admiral, be, and within this, could there be an opportunity to exploit? PSDism is a philosophical viewpoint that emerged in 17th and 18th century Britain and 18th century France, primarily in response to the impact of Newtonian mechanics on the traditional theological worldview. It holds that while God created the universe and the laws governing its existence, he no longer influences its development, allowing the world to exist and develop according to its own laws. This school of thought is exemplified by Newton, and in some ways, he is considered one of its founders. Monophysitism, a mainstream school of thought in the field of theology, originated from Dionysius of Alexandria's interpretation of the humanity and divinity of Jesus. This interpretation states that Jesus, as the nature of God, or the divine nature, absorbed the human nature of Jesus, like wine dropped into the sea, resulting in one person, one nature. Later, at the Fourth Ecumenical Council of Chalcedon in 451, this assertion was declared heretical, and the definition of monophysitism was established to distinguish it from the commonly held view of 2 natures and 1 nature. Dissatisfied with this ruling, a church centered around Christians in the Middle East broke away and called itself the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's worth noting that the full name of Eastern Orthodoxy is the Orthodox Catholic Church, and while the two are related, they are not the same organization. Chapter 233 The Devil's Bible. My head is so dizzy. My mouth is so thirsty. Water. The cool and refreshing water slid into his throat, and more flowed down the corners of his mouth onto his body, refreshing his soul. The heavy chaos was broken. Suddenly, Belle was seized by the surprise and rebirth of the young swallows when they shed their shells. The vast amount of signals came flooding in, and although he greedily wanted to know, he couldn't grasp the reality and couldn't distinguish the truth. I feel so bloated. Bloated? I'll ask Wang Yi to cook less oatmeal porridge tomorrow. I've tried that stuff, too. How should I put it? It's half-cooked and bloating in the stomach. It doesn't seem like food for patience. Belle opened his eyes suddenly. His vision became clear. The small cabin was neat and tidy, with no unnecessary decorations on the walls. The familiar shaking made him know where he was at a glance. On the sea. Belle turned his head and stared at Lorraine. Are we out to sea? Yeah, where are we now? Approximately 36.6 north latitude, 75.3 west longitude, about 45 kilometers east of Virginia Beach, North America. North America, on the continental shelf. When did we go out to sea? 9 days ago? Why didn't I know anything about this? You suddenly had a high fever. I have a high fever, and you still took me out to sea. Are you going to force your way into the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay? Lorraine scratched his head. I've thought about it for you, and I think you definitely don't want to miss such an exciting experience. Belle sat up with a whoosh. Chesapeake Bay? Why are we going to this damn place? Why are we looking for this excitement? Where are we going? Annapolis or Baltimore? It seems to be Baltimore. Baltimore. Belle's voice changed with fear. Don't you know that's the gate of hell? Bah. Don't you know how much your dead brother values that bay mouth? Don't you know it's only 19 kilometers wide? You know it all. You're still looking for death? Belle roared and tried to twist, but his long sleep left him lacking coordination, and he fell backward. Lorraine reached out to steady him, but he grabbed Lorraine with his backhand, holding her like a bear climbing a tree, all the way to her head, pinning her down. Are you so desperate to die? Why didn't you ask me? And what's with that ugly, clown-like headband? Does tying up your curly hair lower the impact surface? Will a bald head blind the firecrackers? You're even wearing makeup. Have you been so confused these past 9 days? Well, Lorraine easily pried Belle's hands apart, stood up, and took Edward's golden wig from the table, covering his head with it. Amidst Belle's shock, he turned and said, "There's one more thing I forgot to tell you. My name is Edward Kenway, a farmer from the New World, a patriotic independent, captain of the Jackdaw, and a smuggler employed by the French Bourbon royal family. Nice to meet you, nice to meet you." Honestly, Belle would rather be nice to Ghost. This was a terrifying event. Shaq had guessed Lorraine was going to overstep his bounds, and he had set up a scheme early on to get Belle infiltrated and placed beside Lorraine, preventing him from straying into the wrong path. But neither Shaq nor Belle could have imagined that Lorraine hadn't taken the wrong path at all. He had simply changed his path, assumed a new identity, and, through some unknown means, had become entwined with the French royal family in just a few months. Oh, dear Jesus Christ, here was a patriotic independent leading a fleet of fools, under the guise of treason. Jesus Christ. Belle realized he had been completely deceived. The vibrant Caribbean branch, the peaceful and tranquil Lucy Manor. In just 6 months in the New World, Lorraine had already struck up a close friendship with the promising up-and-coming Commander Horatio Nelson, been invited as a mercenary to participate in the Battle of the Windward Islands, and had scored a perfect 200 on a 100-point test paper. Wasn't this Francis Drake's life all over again? Isn't this a privateer on the right track? Why would he need to prepare another identity? Why is Edward Kenway actually doing better than Lorraine Drake? And that disease. It struck at just the right moment, not only destroying Lorraine's last chance to reform, but also completely blocking Belle's escape route. Belle suspected that God must have discovered Lorraine's pagan beliefs. Otherwise, why would God, along with the devil, curse such a cruel dementia on this ship of fools? It's just a shame for him, in his prime, so promising, so determined, so noble in his beliefs. Belle, you must think I'm crazy, right? No. Belle cut off his thoughts and shook his head sternly. Mad people have reason and wouldn't do what you do. Lorraine shrugged non-committally. Do you know how valuable this trade route is? 6,000? 8,000, Belle sneered. Even if it's more money than lives, £50,000, at least £50,000. How much? Every month, at least £50,000. Net profit, £50,000, every month. You forgot the minimum. Lorraine played with his fingers leisurely. £50,000 is the profit from sending it to Baltimore, and the independence movement will extend all the way to New England. Under pressure from our great motherland, Americans can't transport supplies beyond 3 states, so we charge by the distance traveled. Fair play, gulp. Bell didn't know who swallowed, only that his throat was dry and burning. £50,000, how much will I get per month? Because this is an independent project of the Chamber of Commerce, we need to deduct no more than 10% for expenses, mainly for incentives, pensions, and social costs. The rest is all dividends. The seamen collectively own 30% of the shares. At the lowest standard, that's £13,500 per month, settled at the end of the year. How many seamen do you have? Henna, Kren, Noah, Acheron, Carmen, Wang Yi, Daniel, Katerina, and you. That's all for now. Bell's mouth dropped open slightly. £13,500, 9 people, £1,500 per month, and an active duty lieutenant commander earns £60 a year, which is equivalent to 1 month of gambling, 25 years of military service, Lorraine kindly replied. And this is a long-term business. As long as we survive, how much we earn depends on how long our great motherland is willing to fight. Bell suddenly realized. Drake is the devil's surname. Shaq Drake is a devil, and so is Lorraine Drake. There's no difference between the devil and the devil, because no matter what he wants to do, you'll end up doing it for him willingly. This is the devil's Bible. He staggered to his feet, his face pale, then ruddy, then blue, then purple. You must have a war room, right? Shaq Drake said you brothers have done hundreds of map exercises, and your win rate is over 70%. I want to hear your plan, Lorraine said with difficulty, although there is a war room, but I've already committed treason. In this sea, on this ship, even if I jump overboard and swim to the lion now, I can't wash away the suspicion of treason. I don't want to be covered in tar and hung on the Thames to dry, so I'm joining. Bell made a quick and decisive decision. As long as the conditions were met, he had never let Lorraine down. Lorraine had expected this. He extended his hand and smiled at Bell. This is a belated invitation. May I ask your reason? As is customary. What else? Bell rubbed his hands together and shook Lorraine's hand firmly. Your Drake motto is right, young people. Money is enough. Why bother with your life? Helmsman Bell Judea, congratulations, you've been accepted. P.S. Does anyone remember Captain Kidd on the Thames? P.S. Bell has only now officially joined the Drake Chamber of Commerce. As a corps seaman, the ceremony is very important. Chapter 234 Circular Formation Assisted Defense Tactics. A massive nautical chart lay spread out in the war room, encompassing nearly the entire east coast of North America, stretching from Florida in the south to the distant island of Newfoundland. Bermuda, isolated offshore, was centered on a bright red fan-shaped frame, encompassing the vast coastline from Cape Sable on the Florida peninsula to the town of Montauk on Long Island, New York. Another fan-shaped frame, connecting to it and starting at Montauk, covered all of Canada and the remainder of the eastern coast of the United States. This was the patrol area of the 2 divisions of the Continental Squadron of the Royal British Navy's New World Fleet. The 1st Division, based in Hamilton, commanded operations south of New York, while the 2nd Division, based in Channel Basque, Newfoundland, directed operations north of New York. Rear Admiral Sir Charles Drake was the admiral of this division and the overall commander of the powerful 1st Division. Lorraine knew Sir Charles well, even boasting that he understood his command style in wartime, thinking better than anyone else in the world. Hundreds of map-based exercises had not only improved the 2 brothers' relationship but also deepened their mutual understanding. But now, the enemy was clear, while we were in the dark. Within the fan-shaped frame of the 1st Fleet were 6 strange perfect circles, 3 red and 3 black. These 6 circles stretched from Grand Bahama Island to the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, sometimes close to, sometimes far from, the mainland. The piece representing the jackdaw was at the center of the northernmost perfect circle. Lorraine picked up the teaching stick. Shaq's fleet warfare thinking is based on a special kind of defensive thinking, which is the circular formation defense tactics you see. In this tactic, the fleet will be divided into small formations of varying sizes, arranged in circular trajectories in a clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, and so on. Each route trajectory has 1 to 3 observation points. Within a limited time, the subordinate trajectory must observe that the superior trajectory is sailing normally before it is allowed to start the second round of patrols. If the superior trajectory loses contact, it will be regarded as encountering the enemy. The subordinate trajectory will search in the opposite direction of the superior ship's movement and join the battle as reinforcements, route restrictions, speed restrictions, and handover restrictions. Because of the overly complex basic structure, Shaq's circular formation defense tactics were regarded as stiff, rigid, inappropriate, and lacking in initiative in the eyes of the Royal Navy's staff. This led to the Admiralty's evaluation of Shaq's command ability always being low, but Lorraine pushed the Jackdaw's chess piece all the way south until it coincided with a section of the arc of the southernmost circle. Suppose we don't understand Shaq's tactical thinking as well as the Admiralty staff who have read his 3 relevant papers. What would happen if the Jackdaw ran into Patrol Group 1 at this point? There would be a firefight. Bell took over the conversation, fished out more chess pieces from a small box beside him, and placed 3 of them around the Jackdaw. A patrol group has 2 to 4 ships. If we take 3 of them, the enemy discovered by the patrol circle will be engaged in battle. If we can't quickly defeat the enemy in front of us, Patrol Group 2 will search for reinforcements. Bell placed 3 more chess pieces, the Jackdaw facing 6 against 1. Then number 3, 4, 5, seeing that the Jackdaw was facing a dense crowd of chess pieces, Lorraine swept the teaching stick and knocked all the pieces to the ground. This is the basic principle of Shaq's tactics. The tactical structure is static, but the tactical defense is dynamic, the exact opposite of the active defense and static bombardment of the world's major powers. An invading enemy is often confused by the initial small number of enemies. But a standard encounter often lasts more than 2 hours, and Shaq's orders to his subordinates are mainly to delay the attack, defend and counterattack. By the time the enemy reacts, Shaq has already reversed the situation, steadily rising from the weaker side to the stronger, or even the more powerful side. Bell interrupted again. Our teacher, Sir Leighton, called Shaq Drake the Anaconda entrenched in the Royal Navy. His terrifying thing is that his circular defense is an open conspiracy, an upright tactic, hide the lower-level formations in the hinterland, allowing the higher-level formations to penetrate the enemy. If the enemy is equal, delay reinforcements. If the enemy is strong, sacrifice troops and reorganize the army, forming a battle line and driving the enemy back thousands of miles. His tactics are mature. Trapped in it is like prey being strangled by an anaconda. There is no other way except to kill the snake and escape. Bell took a long breath, looking up to admire the thoughtful expressions of the crowd. Acheron, with his solid military foundation, frowned the most, followed by the half-baked Pierce and the elite pirate Katarina. Those who understood a bit more were Kren and Wang Yi, and then there was the complete indifference, Henna, Noah, Carmen, and Daniel. There was a long silence, and Kren swallowed hard. If this tactic is unstoppable, why haven't we encountered any significant obstacles along the way besides being cautious? The Jackdaw has even been anchored in these waters for hours, and it hasn't been detected by that defensive tactic yet. Bell rolled his eyes in annoyance. Because in this world, only this freak, Lorraine, is special. Huh? Everyone was puzzled. Lorraine, with an enthusiastic gaze, spread his hands and said, "You all know about Shaq and I. These minor grudges have nothing to do with today. Before that, we had a very good relationship, huh?" With the exception of Henna, Bell, and a few others, everyone else's faces were filled with even more confusion. There's nothing to be surprised about. A father is kind and a son is filial. When father was still alive, we were model brothers. Many elements of his circular tactics were my suggestions. Of course, the ideas and creations are all his, there is no doubt about that. I helped him perfect the circular tactics, and I also discussed with him the biggest flaw in the tactics. It's still the characteristic of a python. This tactic can only make various changes after being activated by an invader, just like a python that can't strangle its opponent. In the end, it's just a big piece of snake meat without poison or speed. Yatring hesitated. Is this a flaw? As a regional defense based on the assumption of an enemy invasion, this is indeed not a flaw. After all, no country would condone 1 or 2 fast ships to launch an invasion independently. Doing so would only make people laugh and would be useless, but we are different. The Viper is everything to us. It is agile, fast, and can move forward and backward freely. Under the same wind conditions, its speed is higher than the fastest brig-class warship. Our observation range exceeds 20 kilometers. The defensive formation is powerless against us. We can't catch up or lock us up. In fact, I only observed 3 circles and calculated the specific trajectories of the other 3 circles. Kren said that the Jackdaw had been anchored in this sea area for half a day, which proves that my calculations were correct. So I was able to hide in the center of the sixth circle and hide in the blind spot of the entire formation's observation. In short, the tactics that Shaq is proud of are useless to us. On this smuggling line, our only difficulty is the teaching stick pushed forward, slowly, and firmly pressed on a point. The gap between Cape Charles and Cape Henry, the big shell of Algonquin, the treasure land of Virginia and Maryland, that is, this section of the Chesapeake Bay with a width of only 19 kilometers, our gate of hell. P.S. The name of Chesapeake comes from the unique language of an Indian branch called Algonquin. In its context, Chesapeake means Big Shell Bay. P.S. 2. Have you noticed a problem of adding updates from time to time recently? I am trying to increase the update volume, but it is still in the trial operation stage. There will be an official notice when it can be stabilized. Well, that's it. 0. Chapter 235 Arcs and Intersections. Late at night, 26 kilometers east of the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. At the helm of the Jackdaw, Bell carefully rechecked the wind vane, adjusted the compass on the side of the hand wheel, and then stood in front of the hand wheel, assuming a steering posture, to ensure that the wind vane, compass, and sail remained within his sight. Everything was ready. Lorraine glanced at the merrily spinning wind vane and casually remarked, I still prefer to use my turbine to observe the wind, because once the ship is moving, this rooster with its head tilted back and swaying from side to side always gives me a sense of unreality, making me want to smash it. That's why the Lord said you wasted your talent. Bell squatted down to check the knots, not only the fixed rope that would soon save his life, but also the knots related to the mizzen mast that would soon be darting over his head. The assault distance is over 20 kilometers, wider than the bay we're about to breach. The coastline is out of sight for a long time, and it's a night voyage. Even with me at the helm, this is a first in my life. You can tidy it up and show it off to Miss Orphy. Come on, she won't understand. Lorraine shrugged. So I'll never fall in love with a landlubber again, you? Bell sneered. You're the only one who thinks you have the power to choose, huh? It's okay. Bell saw the dancing wind chicken. The wind's messed up. The Jackdaw hoisted its sails. First, the towering mainsail, then the wide mizzen. The sailsmen controlled the sails to counteract the wind, trying to prevent the Jackdaw from being overly affected by the wind. Even so, the Jackdaw's speed increased, gradually outpacing the current, and the bow kicked up a wave of water. Lorraine stood behind Bale on the top deck of the poop, holding the railing tightly with both hands. Mainmast lookout Hina, foremast lookout Pierce, main fore rigger Cran, aft rigger Wangai. Open the bowgun port, Atrin in position. Foredeck commander Katharina, aft deck commander Bell, take position. Both ports ready for action. Foremast, hoist the sail, hoist the foremast sail, Katharina ordered loudly. The clear female voice was particularly clear in the night sky, reaching the sky. The only square sail of the Jackdaw was raised. The 26-meter-high mast had 4 independent square sails, from bottom to top, from large to small. The wind-catching sail between the foremast and the mainmast, hanging in the air, was untied by the sailor hanging on the cable, and then the bow halyard connecting the foremast and the bowsprit also opened the bow sail. The snow-white sails swelled in the wind, and the sail hooks on the mainmast and the mizzenmast worked together to drag the boom and pull the forerigger. Full sail. Lorraine suddenly felt a powerful force pushing backward, and the Jackdaw suddenly rushed forward. As soon as the propeller started, the speed climbed rapidly from a floating state of less than 0.5 to nearly 6 knots, and continued to increase. Heading due west, wind speed force 4, gentle breeze. Jackdaw, the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, breakthrough. Bell's eyes were fixed on the compass, his hands tightly gripping the hand wheel, and he locked onto the wind vane with his peripheral vision, catching the subtle vibrations of the windcock on the whirring windcup, and rhythmically adjusting the ship's direction at a very small angle. The Jackdaw was almost always at the best angle to cut a wind, and the entire sailing trajectory was an uneven zigzag line, rather than a beautiful and clean straight line or arc. The seemingly longer voyage was actually more efficient. Lorraine had already gone to the bow and handed over the command of the entire rear deck to Bell. Bell lived up to expectations. With the coordination of Cran and Wangi, the 2 foresails and the rudder formed a perfectly controlled whole. With the guidance of the 2 lookouts and the wheel in front of the rudder, without deviating from their course, in less than 10 minutes, they pushed the Jackdaw to its maximum speed under the given sails and wind conditions, 9 knots. The foredeck temporarily settled into a relatively comfortable period of stability. Catalina, feeling the wind, glanced back at the aft deck in shock. Captain, where did you pick up this monster? Is our helmsman a child of the wind? The sea breeze isn't George's domain, and George is my faith. Lorraine smacked his lips speechlessly. Catalina, don't you think what I said just now was a bit rude? No, because your god clearly prefers the helmsman to you. Lorraine decided not to argue with a woman, even if she was a female knight. He raised his arm and pointed at the dark sea. Bell was originally the helmsman of Zheng Drake's flagship. Although he was unable to set foot on Bermuda's Long Beach due to various accidents, based on his understanding of Zheng, he still believed that we would encounter a blockade formation at the mouth of the bay. Coincidentally, Count Galvez's intelligence also mentioned the blockade formation. The Lion, Conqueror and Exhilaration take turns serving as flagships, with 2 wings. One is an ordinary level 5 ship, and the other is generally a Baltimore brig, which is a warship-type frigate with wing sails and a maximum speed of 12 knots. We can't know in advance where they will set the blockade line, but fortunately the bay is wide enough. Even if it's only 2 kilometers, we can try to avoid the terrible level 3 ships and destroyers with better firepower than ours. The only trouble is that military high-speed ship. Once we are entangled by it, we will die miserably. Catalina's face showed no emotion. She whispered, escape is a pirate's specialty. Although our top speed is only 0.5 knots different, I will show her the difference between a high-speed warship and a high-speed plundering ship, then I'll leave it to you. Break through. Break through. An hour and a half later, the speeding Jackdaw finally crossed the 26 kilometers from its starting point to the bay's mouth, approaching the vast Chesapeake Bay from near the center line. To conceal its whereabouts, no lights were on the ship, and all sailors ran in the moonlight. But today's moonlight was bright, and visibility on the vast sea surface barely reached 3 kilometers. The good lighting conditions gave the Jackdaw more room to evade, but on the other hand, it also increased the possibility of being discovered, raising the risk of encounter. Fortune and misfortune are intertwined, and until the blockade formation has been officially broken through, no one on board dared to let their guard down. Routine briefing. Northwest, Cape Charles, 12 kilometers, southwest, Cape Henry, 11 kilometers, Pierce and Hannah's voices echoed overhead. Lorraine used a compass to draw 2 arcs on the chart. Their intersection was within striking distance of the bay's mouth. He rested his chin on his hand, guessing the blockading fleet's position, and incidentally, the fleet's flagship, and the possibility of encountering the Lion. It might sound a bit ridiculous. Once a fleet reaches a certain size, the administrative duties requiring the admiral's personal attention increase dramatically. Admirals of large fleets often reduce or even abandon their daily sailing duties to free up time for minor matters. The normal rhythm for British admirals, like Sir Parker, is to travel between various bases, with the flagship operating independently. But Lorraine knew that Shark was never good at handling matters. Whether it was clerical or social matters, his need for control, regardless of the situation, always messed things up. Only when he was on board could he find a moment of peace. Even years ago, when he was promoted to the logistics department, he often used the excuse of checking supply consumption to occupy other ships. The captains complained home, and Area was forced to transfer him back to field duty to barely appease the outrage, which also fulfilled Shaq's wish. Therefore, a man like Shaq would never abandon patrol duty. No matter how busy his duties or how tight his schedule, he would stay on board the Lion when it sailed, commanding the small fleet visible to the naked eye, anticipating the moment of pleasure of killing his enemy. I'll look forward to it too, Shaq. If I could chop off your head, I wouldn't have to worry about all these boring things. Lorraine chuckled self-deprecatingly. This wish was impossible to fulfill. Not only did the Jackdaw lack the ability to board the Lion, but even if he had devised a plan, the Chamber of Commerce would have to avoid a direct confrontation with the Royal Navy as much as possible. Fighting breeds hatred. Once hatred solidifies, Edward Kenway will become a ticking time bomb in the Drake Chamber of Commerce, one day shattering Lorraine and his Chamber of Commerce. What a foolish fantasy. Lorraine shook his head, trying to clear his mind of those unrealistic thoughts. Suddenly, he heard Hannah's voice. Ship light 7 kilometers northwest, 10 o'clock, relative speed 3.5, 7 kilometers, 10 o'clock? Lorraine jolted awake and quickly marked the nautical chart. A semicircle, centered at the intersection of the 2 arcs, covered the entire bay and part of the bay. At 10 o'clock, a glaring intersection appeared. It wasn't from the unpredictable blockade formation, but from a pure black, perfect circle. Tisk. Patrol formation number 6? What luck. Lorraine pushed the chart aside in frustration and stood up. In the current situation, if they continue to break through the center line, they will be able to swagger through the front of the number 6 formation at a very close distance. This behavior is tantamount to provocation and will definitely cause a backlash from the number 6 formation. It's not that the jackdaw can't get rid of them, but when the position of the blockade formation is unclear, doing so will greatly increase the risk of being surrounded. Evasion is certain, and they can't go through Cape Charles in the north. The only option is Cape Henry in the south. The only. Lorraine became irritated. Belle, evade to the left and avoid the trouble in front of us first. Henna continues to track the light, and Pierce observes straight ahead. Everyone. Level 1 alert. Chapter 236 Personnel and Financial Power. Chesapeake Bay, Blockade Force, HMS Lion, a Class III battleship. In the sealed-off Admiral's cabin, Shaq frowned as he read a report. This report, originating from distant Newfoundland, was marked top secret and kept from unauthorized personnel. The 2nd Squadron of the Continental Fleet stated that the Canadian garrison intended to facilitate the peaceful reconciliation of the vital port city of Portland. The operational plan had been reviewed, and the Army was conducting a comprehensive search for personnel to carry it out. The Canadian garrison also requested the full cooperation of the 2nd Squadron, with the Navy responsible for deploying and retrieving personnel and providing necessary naval support. The timing and wording of this request were highly sensitive. On land, General Clinton's southward campaign had yielded fruitful results. Aside from minor setbacks in places like New Orleans, most battles had resulted in decisive and final victories. This marked a shift in the garrison's military focus in combating armed rebellion in North America. The next phase of military operations would likely continue to revolve around Savannah, leaving the Canadian garrison defending New England to watch from the sidelines, witnessing glory, merit, prestige, and privileges slipping further and further away. Meanwhile, at sea, Sir Parker established a new order in the Caribbean with a decisive and brilliant campaign, simultaneously suppressing France and defeating the Dutch. The greatest significance of the Windward Islands campaign was that it fundamentally established Britain's dominant position in the New World. The Royal Navy could act freely, for with the current strength of all parties involved, even if France united its forces, Britain would not fear a challenge. But just then, a request for action from the North suddenly arrived on Shark's desk, its words revealing a strong desire to usurp the initiative. The operational plan had been reviewed, meaning the operation was a foregone conclusion. The executors were being extensively selected, meaning all garrisons must cooperate. Support from the sea was sought. New England lay close to Boston Harbor, and this time, the return was declared peaceful. Since all-out war was not on the offing, why bother involving the Navy? It seemed only possible that General Clinton had received the naval support he had received during his series of southward campaigns, and since the South had support, the North would demand it. Shaq picked up his quill with distaste, ready to reject the request. He disliked having himself and his men used as targets of the Army's jealousy, especially since this operation was only targeting Boston. Boston was the North's most prosperous port, its vast docks filled with advanced British-built artillery batteries. Given the conditions, the fleet simply couldn't possibly conduct a ground attack. But just as he put pen to paper, a sudden thought struck him. The 2nd Squadron had submitted the request for action. If the Canadian garrison, like some demented person, had demanded a bombardment of the port by the fleet, it would be the 2nd Squadron that would be thwarted. Why had they submitted this request? Wasn't it just the Army to the north that was unwilling to be relegated to a supporting role? Was the Navy, too, becoming restless? Shaq's brow furrowed once more. Britain's colonial power structure accorded considerable respect to expatriates at all levels. Each colony had its own independent governor, accorded powers commensurate with the colony's nature, and acting as the head of state, controlling both military and political affairs. In practice, however, the colonies might have managed to organize some land forces for maintaining public order, but they lacked the ability and were not permitted to establish their own independent navies. The colonies' truly combat-capable naval and land forces were dispatched from mainland China. While the colonies provided military funds, personnel remained firmly in the hands of the mainland military. Personnel and financial power are the two pillars of military organization, and the separation of these two pillars naturally led to two consequences. First, the governor nominally controlled the army, but in reality was dependent on it. Even with vital logistics and supplies at his fingertips, he dared not overly criticize it, let alone enforce its command. Officers from aristocratic families would not starve to death. If they were no longer needed here, they could go elsewhere. Second, personnel control needed to be centralized. Centralizing personnel authority meant integrating colonial armies into the national military system. Only in this way could normal promotions and transfers occur, preventing the emergence of independent kingdoms. Take the New World Navy, for example. As Admiral of the Fleet, Peter Parker systematically controlled the entire New World Expeditionary Navy. Under his command were three major squadrons, the Caribbean, Continental, and South American squadrons, each further divided into several subfleet formations. While these fleets were supposed to be integrated from a personnel perspective, they maintained a degree of independence, as the colonies controlled the majority of the fleet's military budget. Peter Parker personally assisted the Pan-Caribbean colonies, and the only fleet he had full control over was the Caribbean Squadron, of which he concurrently commanded. This included the 1st Jamaica Squadron, which served the Central Caribbean, the 2nd Barbados Squadron, which served the Windward Islands, the 3rd Bahamas Squadron, which served the Bahamas, and the 4th Gulf Squadron, which served the Central American colonies. During the Battle of the Windward Islands, he deployed all ships from the 1st through 3rd Squadrons, retaining the 4th Squadron intact to counter the Spanish, whose stance was ambiguous at the time. Shark's situation was similar. As Admiral of the Continental Squadron, his primary source of military funding came from the 13 colonies, Canada, and Bermuda. Military expenditures south of New York State and the Bermuda Islands support the 1st Division, while those north of New York State and Canada support the 2nd Division. Therefore, Sir Parker doesn't have complete control over him, and he doesn't have complete control over the 2nd Division either. However, since all military expenditures are allocated and consolidated through him, the relationships within the squadron are much closer than between him and Sir Parker. Due to the internal ties within the naval system and the importance of the fleet's survival, the entire New World Fleet naturally unites on major issues. However, in specific details, if the 2nd Division is willing to cooperate with a Canadian garrison, even if he denies it, the 2nd Division will find other reasons to act. "That's why I don't like to make any approvals," Shaq muttered, picking up his pen and writing at the bottom of the application, "Application received. Given the comprehensive sea defense system of Boston Harbor, it is recommended that the relevant ship-to-ground attack request be denied to avoid significant losses. Furthermore, there is no need to report the details of cooperation with Army colleagues. The specific level of involvement is at your discretion." Shaq Francis Drake, July 6, 1779. After finally finishing an important document, Shaq twisted his sore neck and stood up. The clock in the cabin had already passed 10 o'clock, and before he knew it, it was already late at night. At this time, the ship should have entered the night watch state, retaining only 1/6 of the sailors to maintain basic ship operation and guard. As for the fleet staff and admiral's lieutenants assigned to him as the admiral, they had probably gone to bed long ago. Lack of energy is the enemy of thinking. When it is not necessary, he has always opposed officers who use their intelligence to stay up late for no reason. Speaking of which, dealing with such boring matters should also be regarded as a waste of energy. Shaq thought lazily, pushed open the cabin door, and saw the officer on duty walking towards the captain's room. "Is there anything sudden?" Shaq asked. The officer on duty snapped to attention and saluted. "Report to the admiral. I was just about to report to the captain that formation number 6 passed the first observation point, when it was delayed for 8 minutes, and there was no abnormality in the light signal. Is it still too short?" Shaq sighed. "The manual should have told you that when the superior formation passes the observation point normally, the subordinate formation will move according to the preset order, and then report to the formation commander for additional preparations after the movement begins." The officer on duty looked embarrassed. "But, the lion and the blockade formation do not perform circular movements. Circular is just a pattern. And joint defense is the foundation. As a subordinate unit, you will most likely be asked to perform rectangular movement, triangular movement, or even straight and tangential movement according to the hydrology and terrain. This is not a reason to exclude yourself from the joint defense system." "Yes, Admiral. I'll keep it in mind," the officer on duty responded with full energy, but he was complaining in his heart. "Except for you, which other admiral would do such a thankless and complicated joint defense? You must be thinking, no one else would let you do any of these shack tactics, right?" The duty officer was nearly frightened. Shack tactics was originally Lorraine's name for the defensive formations of a circular formation. Later, through Belle's mouth, it spread to the Wanderer and then to the Lion, where it degenerated into denigration and mockery of Shack. It was supposed to be a joke shared only by senior sailors and junior officers. The duty officer never imagined that Shack was aware of it. Thinking of Belle's sudden disappearance, the duty officer began to tremble. "Admiral, that's not it. You should know which ship you're serving on, Captain." Shack had no interest in hearing any explanation. "This is the Lion, Drake's flagship. I don't intend to change my flagship until I'm killed in the line of duty or forced to retire. As long as you're aboard this ship, wherever you go, you must be familiar with Shack tactics, whether you agree with them or not." "Yes, Admiral." "Go, deliver the deployment order." "Yes, Admiral." The duty officer ran in a panic. Shack watched his back and couldn't help but chuckle at himself. Everyone thinks the circular formation is stupid, but they don't know that some people once gave it high praise. "Right, brother." The blockade formation began to move according to the preset order. The southernmost heir ship moved forward, vacating the space for the center line to fill, and then turned sideways. The high-speed brig to the north also turned sideways, hiding behind the Lion and pausing. This marked a shift from a horizontal chain defense to a three-dimensional defense, characterized by a narrower defense surface but deeper depth. As Formation 6 continued its trajectory, it would increasingly cover the bay's entrance. The original horizontal chain would overlap with Formation 6 in this situation, resulting in a waste of firepower. However, no one anticipated the forward-moving Tier 5 ship would be confronted head-on by the uninvited enemy entering the bay. Alert! Alert! All crew members, immediate deployment, roll call. Enemy at outpost. Enemy at outpost. A sharp whistle shattered the tranquility of the night sky. The disheveled captain, eyes red, ran from his cabin, his gaze fixed on the darkness. "Admiral, you are the commander-in-chief of the formation. Do your thing." Shack stared coldly at the darkness in front of him. "The front has opened fire, and judging from the sound of the guns, the enemy has bypassed the outpost and is rushing towards us in a panic. Attack us." The captain realized that the Lion was heading in the wrong direction. "Horizontal, slow down, three-dimensional defense. We are now heading due north, and the Rhinoceros Beetle is on standby at 11 o'clock. There is plenty of time, and the target can't escape." "Yes," the captain saluted loudly. "Open the starboard gun ports, turn left 5 degrees, and wait for the enemy to tire. Ready for battle." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 237, The Bay of Damarisk. Lights due north, 8.5 kilometers, relative speed 3 knots, land due south, 4 kilometers, watch out for rocks near the shore, entering the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, all clear, turn due west, all personnel return to their positions, closely monitor the distance to the coast and report any changes, captain's order, alert reduced to level 3, all personnel are on standby, mess hall and divination hall open, all non-essential deck activities prohibited. Lorraine drew a bright arc on the chart, representing the Jackdaw's movement from its previous position, diagonally southward, spanning approximately 3 kilometers east-west and deviating approximately 6 kilometers north-south, to its current position. The ship's speed remained unchanged, and the sails maintained their optimal angle of attack. Formation 6 was also left behind, and the Jackdaw officially entered the Chesapeake, just south of the bay's mouth. The crew was unfamiliar with the area, and the charts they had were commonplace, crudely made and lacking in coastal detail. Due to the nighttime visibility issues, further approach to the coast was difficult. High speed, congestion, lack of maneuvering, a formidable enemy lurking just beyond his reach. Lorraine knew he was far from safe, but that was the nature of Shack's home turf. Unless the attacker possessed an overwhelming advantage, they had to endure and adapt to this slowly suffocating pressure. Failure to adapt led to confusion, and confusion led to mistakes. Mistakes led to falling into Shack's trap, and once tangled in his web, the death knell would ring in their ears. Bang! 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 The echo of the coastal church bells echoed across the vast sea, a melodious sound that left Lorraine stunned. This wasn't unusual, after all. Cape Henry was never just a cape, but a bustling town with thousands of people, complete with a church, a dock, and even coastal batteries to repel pirates. For services, masses, weddings, funerals, and anything else like that, it was the church's duty to join in the fun and ring the bells to announce it to the higher authorities. But just as he was thinking of the death knell, it rang out in his ears. Lorraine spat bitterly, leaving Katharina bewildered beside him. "Captain, did a fish just hit you in the mouth?" Jackdaw's gunnel. Lorraine gestured wordlessly toward the shore. The death knell, Katharina suddenly realized. Perhaps some gentleman on shore has been honored, not sooner, not later. Now, perhaps to warn. Lorraine froze in place. A tip-off? The shark's circular formations were interconnected, and their movement patterns extended far beyond a circular one. The blockade formation was also part of the interconnected system. When Formation 6 arrived at the bay's mouth, from north to south, closing the gates, blocking the roads, the accessible bay narrowed. Excluding the area monitored by Formation 6, the remaining area was the possible location of the blockade formation. With Group 6 now to the north, the blockade group would be to the south. The Jackdaw had two lookouts ready. Hannah kept a close eye on the receding Group 6, while Pierce watched the coast. There was a temporary loss of visibility ahead. If the blockade group actually deployed in this direction, the result would be encounter. Lorraine was startled. "Hannah! Head on!" he shouted, leaping to his feet and peering forward. In the deep, thick darkness, something massive seemed to be lurking. Distance 1,200 meters, relative speed 14 knots, frontal shadow, evade, full starboard rudder, evade, collision warning. List warning. Attack warning. Evade, they've spotted us. Boat on fire, port rudder hit. A shout from the foredeck crew was followed by the roar of artillery fire. In that brief moment of reaction, the range had closed to 800 meters. The Jackdaw's evasive starboard cut forced her entire port side to the enemy's bow guns. The boom of artillery fire. Lorraine saw a blinding flash of fire, followed by a massive explosion of water from the sea 200 or 300 meters from the Golden Hind. "Bell, ignore the bombardment, keep cutting out. We need space, I know." Bell gritted his teeth, firmly and resolutely pressing the hand wheel. Within the limited angle, he desperately sought an opportunity to cut back into the wind. Sharp turns are the enemy of speed. In just this brief turn, the Jackdaw's speed dropped by nearly half. Bell quickly caught a wind, the ship stabilized, and its speed began to slowly recover. A sailor rushed out of the gun bay and shouted to Lorraine, "Captain, port side is ready to fire." Lorraine took a deep breath. "Full guns, meet the enemy as we cut broadside. Tell Atcherin to focus on disrupting the enemy and not let the recoil disrupt your center of gravity." "Yes." As he spoke, the broadside began. The Jackdaw and the opposing Tyrvee ship passed each other like parallel lines on the sea, less than 300 meters apart. Bows crossed, port facing port. Port side hit. Evade, boom 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 boom. Boom 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 boom. Both sides opened fire almost simultaneously, the Tyrvee ship's 18-pounder, the Jackdaw's 12-pounder, the barrage of fire stirring a turbulent storm in the narrow sea. Bell skillfully cut a narrow angle of less than 3 degrees, avoiding the predetermined course, causing two shells that had a strong chance of hitting to miss and crash into the Jackdaw's side. Atcherin, perfectly anticipating Bell's reaction, fired his broadside guns from front to back, adjusting to the ship's shifting center of gravity and, with a stroke of luck, catching the enemy's hull, sending them into a state of panic. The dangerous broadside was over in an instant, and the two ships separated, 300, 350, 400 meters apart. The distance steadily widened. Hannah, tracking the blurry enemy, shouted a warning, "Enemy ship cuts port, fire." Stern hit, another round of continuous roars erupted, and the guns fired from 500 meters away. A cloud of water exploded at the Jackdaw's stern, sending waves crashing against the hull and shaking the ship violently. Lorraine grabbed the sailor who had fallen away and planted his feet firmly on the deck. "Damn British speed. I finally know what it feels like to face us." Katharina stood helplessly beside him, a lashing rope already tied around her waist. "We've been discovered, Captain. Next, the British warships will surround us like sharks smelling blood." "Who made their admiral a shark?" Lorraine sneered. "Things have not gone beyond expectations. At least the number 6 formation and the ship we just got rid of can't catch up with us for the time being. We can just look forward." "You look a little excited," The reason why Damocles was afraid was not because the sword hanging over his head was sharp, but because the thin horsehair might break at any time. Now that the sword has fallen, catch it or dodge it. And we will be the winners of this banquet. Lorraine's face became more and more cheerful. Belle, bring back the wind. The rabbit's weapon is speed. If we have difficulty walking, we deserve to be eaten by lions. Looking for it, Belle stared at the wind vane without raising his head. Also, lions hate eating rabbits because there is too little meat on them, not even enough to fill their teeth. We are fat rabbits. Lorraine slammed the guardrail at hand and clenched it tightly. Dionysius, as noble as you are you really hiding behind the curtain? I'm looking forward to it. Distance 1,400, bearing 11 o'clock, huge ship shadow, judging by the bow, HMS Lion battleship, approaching, fire. Bombardment, the boas hit, evade, boom. Boom boom boom. P.S. Everyone is familiar with the story of the Damocles carrot, also known as the hanging sword, which comes from the ancient Greek legend. King Dionysius invited his minister Damocles to a banquet and ordered him to sit under a gleaming sword suspended from a horsehair. This is where this illusion came from. Chapter 238 Waiting for the Wind. The 32-pounder, the most powerful mobile smoothbore gun of its era, has long been regarded as a symbol of naval supremacy. Few nations in the world could manufacture this heavy artillery: Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands. Each represented world order, each tirelessly spreading the light of civilization to all humanity. Civilization is an all-devouring monster, and this is the sharpest fang in its mouth. Across the world, the standard 32-pounder naval gun was typically cast in pure iron, 2.7 meters long, weighed 2.5 tons, and had a caliber of 15.9 centimeters. It was equipped with 18-pound solid projectiles, chain bullets, and 32-pound scattershot. Each gun typically employed between 10 and 16 operators, with a rate of fire of 1 round per 3 minutes, compared to 1.5 minutes in the UK. The maximum range was 1,350 meters at a firing angle of 4 degrees and 2,250 meters at an angle of 8 degrees. Within 100 meters, its cord shells could easily penetrate 10 centimeters thick oak planking. Within 300 meters, it could inflict direct damage to ships of Tier 5 and below, effectively piercing the hull with a single shot. It was a veritable weapon of the sea, and only massive galleon-class warships of Tier 3 and above could withstand its terrifying recoil. HMS Lion was such a Tier 3 battleship. As the Royal Navy's newest and most advanced young force, its overall rating surpassed even the 98-gun HMS Duke of Wales, making it the undisputed leader of the Royal Navy's New World Fleet. This was Sir Charles Drake's flagship. At a distance of 900 meters, Lion's powerful broadsides delivered their first saturation barrage, firing 14 32-pounder cannons and 15 18-pounder cannons in quick succession. The waves rippled through the horizon, creating a spectacular spectacle of the sea splitting in the distance. But her master showed no sign of delight. Shaq put down the telescope expressionlessly and glanced at the combat staff gathered behind him. 900-meter deterrent bombardment, is it a special order from the captain? A headache flashed across the face of the elderly chief of staff. According to the Navy Department's Battle Line Operation Manual, 1,000 meters is the appropriate distance to initiate an attack. The rapid explosion can effectively disintegrate the opponent's battle line, and our well-trained artillery ensures the speed of loading, which will not affect the effect of the formal engagement. Formal engagement? Shaq showed an inexplicable smile on his face. A battle line with a total of 74 guns, and an enemy force composed of a smuggling ship. Chief of Staff, you must not like hunting. Yes, Shaq did not continue, but just shook his head. Inform the rhinoceros beetle that the target is fleeing northwest at high speed and is expected to pass directly in front of it within 5 minutes. Have her pursue it and engage in delaying operations nearby, waiting for the lion and her companions to outflank it. The Chief of Staff interrupted with a chuckle. Admiral, are you giving orders directly, bypassing the formation commander? The rabbit is about to get away. A wise hunter would release the leash at this moment, rather than waiting for the dog to learn to undo its collar. Yes, Admiral. A distinctive whistle. The whistle of a 32-pounder is unique, low and short, like a hammer muffled by layers of fabric, without a trace of fatal danger. But High clearly disagreed. Hundreds of meters away, the waves whipped up by the impact were like a tsunami, the spray soaring into the sky thick and wide, reaching 6 or 7 meters high. Being hit by such a powerful force, or even just being caught within near-miss range, would cause massive damage to a fragile commercial vessel like the Jackdaw. Fortunately, however, they seemed overconfident in their own strength. A bombardment from 900 meters away was pointless. No matter how powerful the attack was, it wouldn't bother the Jackdaw even a few hundred meters out at sea. On the contrary, the resulting waves would effectively obscure the Jackdaw's hull, making it easier for Lorraine to veer away. "Shaq, your mind seems even more rigid after not seeing you for a while," Lorraine sped in boredom. "Belle, try to maintain this distance. While we're looking for an angle, lure the lion into further bombardment, we can actually get closer." "I need some angles," Lorraine thought for a moment and nodded. "No less than 700 meters. Once this wave crests, I'll have Atcherin cover us." 700? "That's enough." A gust of wind swept from the ocean into the bay, flowing inward along the southern shore, rippling the calm sea. The Jackdaw caught the wind and turned slightly southwest. She drew closer to the lion, stepped out of the bombing zone, and assumed a slender stance. But a moment later, a volley of shells was fired from the port side, showering the sea with scattered shells. Thinner, denser waves rose, burying the Jackdaw in the mist again. Belle seized the opportunity to change direction, following the wind's curve outward, finally cutting completely back into the wind. The Jackdaw's barges filled, speed climbed, and climbed again. The lion unleashed a second blast of saturation fire, just as powerful and insignificant as ever. "Cut out, break away." Lorraine returned to the poop deck and stood behind Belle, admiring the delightful curve of the sail. "How does it feel to cut through the golden current?" he asked. "Your brother won't let us go so easily." Belle held the handwheel and rubbed his shoulders. "Although I have never participated in the defense service of the Continental Fleet, based on my understanding of Shaq Drake, there is at least one ship in the blockade fleet, Baltimore brig." Lorraine smiled. "The tactical choice is probably a delaying operation." Before he finished speaking, Pierce's alarm sounded in the air. "Enemy shadow at 8 o'clock, distance 2,600, approaching at high speed." Belle raised his head and found Lorraine. "The high-speed ship you wanted is here. Since there are wing sails, should we use them?" Katerina said that escaping is the specialty of pirates. "I believe the Red Rose of the Caribbean will not let us down." "Tisk. It's so easy for you to be a captain." "This is a misunderstanding," Lorraine argued seriously. "I have been conserving my energy to deal with the life and death crisis that may arise at any time. It's very hard." Under the night sky, the rhinoceros beetle fell behind the Jackdaw with its wing sails spread out, and soon came into Lorraine's sight. Lorraine was familiar with this type of ship: a sword-shaped bow, shield-shaped stern, winged sails, and a slender hull, identical to the Lucky Horseshoe. A creation of Baltimore shipbuilders, this military vessel boasted a far greater length-to-width ratio than conventional warships. While speed was sacrificed for stability, broadside fire, in particular, had a dismal accuracy rate. However, it undoubtedly qualified as a high-speed vessel. Belle had sustained a full 12 knots for extended periods in the strong winds of the Battle of Lee Robert Bay. Although the British captain behind him lacked Belle's skill in maneuvering, and the wind conditions today were far weaker, he nonetheless managed to achieve a near 11-knot advance, aided by the wing sails. With a relative speed of 1.5 knots, 2.7 kilometers per hour, the two sides, one chasing the other for over 40 minutes, were now only 700 to 800 meters away. This distance was sufficient for a bowgun attack, but for a delaying effect, 500 meters was the optimal distance. 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. The captain thought so, and so did Shark aboard the Lion. 3 kilometers east of the rhinoceros beetle, the Lion was breaking through the waves, riding the wind. Shark stood aloof at the bow, his telescope held high, motionless. The lights of the rhinoceros beetle's poop drifted in the distance, and even further away was the clever smuggling ship, likely not far away, but the strict blackout prevented Shark from tracking her whereabouts. So far, Shark had been amazed by the performance of this little rabbit. Starting with Formation 6, they had infiltrated stealthily, evading outposts, remaining calm and composed in the face of the mighty Lion, even daring to approach aggressively to catch the wind. This was especially true during their encounter with the rhinoceros beetle. The rhinoceros beetle averaged 11 knots throughout the chase, easily outmatching most other ships. But as they pursued, the little rabbit, though clearly outmatched by the rhinoceros beetle, had managed to maintain a steady high speed, effectively delaying its capture through sheer strength. This skill, this mentality, and the unity, confidence, and resilience it demonstrates. Unfortunately, no matter how well-performing the outlaws are, they're still just outlaws. Their luck is about to run out. When the rhinoceros beetle opens fire, they'll be ensnared in an inescapable web. The wind picked up. Enjoying the sharp, rising sea breeze, Shaq recalled the recent light signals. According to the previous light signals, the pursuit was progressing steadily, and the bombardment should be scheduled for. Emergency light signal from the rhinoceros beetle, Admiral. Shaq raised an eyebrow in surprise, a bad feeling brewing. What's wrong? The rhinoceros beetle reports that the target has suddenly accelerated. Estimated speed is near 13 knots, and the ship is sailing steadily. Therefore, it's determined that pursuit is no longer possible. The rhinoceros beetle requests to abandon the operation and return to its original position. Actually, 13 knots. Shaq stood there in shock, a wry smile creeping onto his face. Are you waiting for the wind? Make a move and shake off the pursuit. This time, I got fooled by the little rabbit. Gideon seems to be adjusting the rider's benefits. Looking left and right, it seems that they still can't afford the electricity bill. Tisk evil black-hearted capitalists. Chapter 239 Books are a tool for humans to make money. Having broken through the mouth of the bay, the rest of the journey was smooth sailing. Virginia and Maryland were the most crucial pillars of the Revolutionary War, where the nascent United States enjoyed unwavering support and occupied the vast majority of territory. This was especially true along the banks of the Chesapeake Bay, where every inch was brimming with independence fervor. The home sampan fleet enjoyed unparalleled strategic advantages in these waters. Relying on dense coastal artillery batteries and limited French allies, even a formidable vessel like the Lion would not venture deep into the bay and challenge the New World's provincials. In short, the first installment of the £50,000 had been secured. Aboard the Jackdaw, a wave of jubilation reigned. Lorraine had just announced on deck that, to celebrate the first successful smuggling operation, every member of the crew would receive an additional bonus equal to half their annual salary. The resounding praises of God and the captain tickled Bell's heart. He quickly handed the wheel to the ship's fourth helmsman and ran to Lorraine with a grin. Lorraine. No, Captain Kenway, how much is my salary for half a year? Lorraine rolled his eyes. I have the impression that you don't have the problem of valuing money. You are wrong. I have been pursuing fame, Bell said as a matter of course. Why can't I desire money at the same time without affecting it? I must admit that the reason is very sufficient. Lorraine nodded with an exaggerated gesture, and suddenly looked up at the sky. Bell, we are still far from Baltimore. Isn't it inappropriate for you to leave the home for such a small matter? Bell was very sharp and looked suspicious. Why do I feel like you are changing the subject? How is it possible? Lorraine didn't finish his words. Kren moved his shoulders and walked over. Seeing everyone gathered in a circle, he was very surprised. Did I miss something? Bell said quickly. I am asking our captain, how much is the salary of the seaman for half a year? Salary? Did you read the contract? The two turned to Lorraine with puzzled faces. Lorraine rubbed his nose awkwardly. Due to some unusual circumstances, Bell's previous contract was a forgery, modeled after a long-term contract. My signature on the first party was missing my Chinese name, and there was no personal seal. Well, Bell had no experience working for a private chamber of commerce, so he was perfectly fooled. Bell said in disbelief, you lied to me. To be more precise, I didn't trust you, at least that's how it was at the time. Lorraine waved his hand away like a fly. But the unpleasantness is over. The new contract will be signed according to the date of the previous one, including the dividends I told you about, nothing less. Bell still couldn't believe it. You lied to me? No. The new contract, the real contract, how much is the salary? Seeing Lorraine look away again, Kren cleared his throat helplessly and explained, mimicking Lorraine's tone. Seamen of this Chamber of Commerce, food and lodging provided, and together with the president, you share the chamber's brilliant future. Bell was utterly incredulous. Oh my God. I don't even have a salary. Everyone knew that Bell's pursuit of a salary was just an unreasonable release after life and death. After all, the Drake Merchants Guild is no longer what it once was. The 30% dividend from the General Chamber of Commerce constitutes the bulk of the seaman's income. Especially with the advent of smuggling, the average monthly advance revenue per person even exceeds the annual profits of most small and some medium-sized merchants' houses. Drake's seamen have leapt from the middle and upper income classes, proudly entering the ranks of the rare and elite. This also means that once smuggling becomes normalized, the Drake Merchants Guild, with annual revenues exceeding £500,000, will officially enter the ranks of the top tier of merchant houses, based solely on profits. The sky is clear, the clouds are light, the sea is vast, and the Jackdaw sails smoothly along the narrow Chesapeake Bay. This is a vast concave bay, spanning 350 kilometers from north to south and 5 to 60 kilometers from east to west. Without any sense of urgency or pressure, the Jackdaw can only maintain a speed of 8 to 9 knots, and reaching Baltimore at the head of the bay will take a full day and a half. After motivating the crew, Lorraine locked himself in the captain's cabin. He was compiling a pamphlet on circular formation defense, detailing its advantages, disadvantages, trajectories, principles, deployments, and variations. He also included countermeasures suitable for the Jackdaw in every foreseeable scenario. This was a new defensive tactic he and Shaq had developed together. Even if he hadn't been the creator, his understanding of it was no less than Shaq's. Due to his inherent talent and vision, he was even more capable of countering it. Now, he simply sought to theoretically formulate countermeasures, a task easily accomplished for him. The motivation for compiling the pamphlet was simpler than the process itself. This smuggling operation had begun as a feud, and this crazy idea had sprung from a desire to embarrass Shaq, or perhaps simply to engage in combat. But at this point, that original intention no longer mattered. Lorraine knew he wouldn't find a more cost-effective business in America. Even becoming a full-time pirate, human trafficker, or opium dealer wouldn't net him any faster than smuggling arms. Because life is the most stable universal currency in the world, and only in the business of war will issuers spare no effort in investing human lives. Personal connections, cash flow, supply and demand, performance. When Lorraine first began his illicit business, he never dreamed of securing stable, high-value orders, let alone turning smuggling into a long-term business. But now that, by chance, he's managed to squeeze a pie out of limited resources, establishing himself as a direct supplier to the French royal family, what reason does he have to justify his own actions? Every month, after deducting expenses, costs, and dividends, his personal profit is at least £30,000. That's £300,000 in 10 months. How much value does £300,000 represent? Since its opening, the Northwest European branch has largely established a mature trade network, with a monthly profit base of £5,000. If we also estimate the added value of the Caribbean branch after the opening of the Upper Ocean, that should eventually reach £7,000, maintaining dozens of merchant ships of varying sizes and barely reaching a quarter of the Jackdaw's guaranteed smuggling revenue. A first-class battleship, representing the era's most powerful military, cost a base price of £100,000, and a fully equipped ship generally cost no more than £150,000. Great Britain only had 7 ships like this. In 10 months, Lorraine could sell everything he had and fully outfit 2, hanging it on his wall for admiration. A monthly income of £30,000 was far better than the lucrative gold rush, especially since it was only mid-1779. If Lorraine's memory served him right, this business would last for well over a year. Such enormous profits were worth sacrificing anything for. For Lorraine, the immediate priority was to use every possible means to stabilize and de-risk this trade route. The Jackdaw's tactics needed to be countered, not only by Lorraine, but also by Catalina, Bell, and Kren, who were assigned to the command roster, to prevent any unforeseen loss of personnel over the long haul. Consequently, compiling a pamphlet became the best option. Who said it? Books are the ladder to wealth. Lorraine nervously sketched a gold coin in the upper right corner of the booklet's cover. It was a Phocas coin, identical to the one the messenger had used when he'd made his first fortune in Hebeshi. When he finished drawing Phocas's ungainly beard, Lorraine rubbed his wrist and left the cabin. Glancing over, the bustling yet deserted port of Baltimore appeared at the edge of the sea. 2 small armed ships approached, their mainmasts adorned with stars and stripes. Not the 50 stars Lorraine was familiar with, but 13 red and white stars, connected in a perfect circle, the flag of the Great Union. Catalina came over with a frown. "Captain, the waters off Baltimore are filled with Continental Army boats. We don't have a white flag, and waiting for inspection along the way will be very troublesome." Lorraine looked thoughtfully at the empty masthead of the Jackdaw and whispered, "Hang your rose, Jolly Roger. The Americans are smart, they'll understand. The United States flag was adopted on June 14, 1777. Its basic structure is the same as the current stars and stripes, except that the blue field in the upper left corner only has 13 stars arranged in a circle. Before that, the Continental Army's flag was the Grand Union flag, which differed from the stars and stripes in that the blue field in the upper left corner lacked a star, but instead featured the Union Jack, representing Great Britain. Chapter 240 Justice Requires Bloodshed. As Lorraine had said, the Americans understood. As the pirate flag aboard the Jackdaw was unveiled, the entire dock, and even the entire sea, suddenly erupted in excitement. People came and went, spreading the news. The Jackdaw's crew was completely bewildered, until the two American gunboats, signaling a non-belligerent signal, formed a formal escort formation before them. Only then did they realize that Baltimore was welcoming them. A high-profile welcome. The Navy escorted the ship, the dock was cleared, and a large water tank was urgently opened. 7 or 8 pilots scurried out, relaying the ship into the luxurious VIP cabin. Soon, the ship came to a stop, and the water gates closed. The Jackdaw lowered the planks, and Lorraine led Carmen slowly off the ship. Standing at the edge of the plank road, he looked at the pilot in the tank and smiled without saying a word. This wasn't intentional arrogance. In a foreign land, a smile, a greeting, can often help one quickly integrate into the environment, and most of the time, it's a cost-effective way to make a living. But this moment was different from most of the time. Broadly speaking, with the Chesapeake Bay under Shark's blockade, Baltimore, once known as the Pearl of the Atlantic, was deserted and dilapidated, its rows of docks practically empty of merchant ships. But that wasn't to say Baltimore was devoid of ships. In fact, there were very few berths available. Even excluding fishing boats, a large number of ships were still floating on the sea. Most of these vessels were American and French warships, perhaps exceeding 20 in total. Coastal artillery batteries were on standby, an armed alert extended 60 kilometers out to the harbor. Lorraine encountered the American warship at that invisible line. This showed that Baltimore was constantly wary of Shark's reaction, feeling a sense of apprehension and paranoia. And in these circumstances, the Jackdaw, flying the Jolly Roger, broke through the encirclement. Lorraine could only imagine the anticipation and vigilance. From a childhood perspective, Count Galvez had given Lorraine information on all the smuggling docks in the 13 states. Each state paid for its own militia, and the arms delivered in Baltimore were destined solely for the Continental Army. Arms smuggling involved a significant amount of sensitive material and money, so choosing a closed tank as the delivery location was understandable. However, Lorraine had assumed they would complete their agreement at a regular berth before entering the designated hold. Directly entering the tank and closing the sluice gates was premature. While Lorraine was confident the Americans wouldn't simply buy and seize a single cargo of supplies, without prior communication, he couldn't guarantee a welcome or an inspection. The best approach now was to wait and see, waiting for the other side to demonstrate sincerity, then take the initiative and repair the lost trust. However, it seemed the other side was thinking the same thing. Lorraine and Carmen waited for a long time by the deck, but no one approached. 30 or 40 elite infantrymen with rifles were stationed around the tank, and the Jackdaw's crew dared not disembark, each gun port at full readiness. It's just a mere water tank. With the Jackdaw's firepower and defenses, escaping the dock might be difficult, but simply collapsing the tank would be a breeze. A test of patience. The pointless standoff lasted half an hour. Neither Lorraine nor Carmen spoke. But Carmen's strength seemed to have reached its limit. The arm she held on to Lorraine grew heavier and heavier, and she trembled faintly. Lorraine realized he couldn't wait any longer, so he put on a regretful expression and silently raised his arm. Catalina's voice echoed from the deck. "Raise the anchor, open the poop gun ports, and load solid ammunition." The clear voice echoed off the beams of the water tank, and the atmosphere inside suddenly became tense. The scattered infantrymen stopped in their tracks, their rifles tightly gripped. They wanted to raise their weapons, but dared not move without orders. Seeing their expressions, Lorraine felt more reassured, and he raised his arm with a powerful swing. Kren and Wang Yi appeared on the side, one on each side, each accompanied by 30 armed sailors. Muzzles up, line up. Load. The sailors knelt on one knee on the deck, gnashing their teeth as they ripped open the paper casings of their lead bullets and loaded the ammunition into the deep chambers of Charleville's rifles. Ready for battle. Await orders. Bang. Rah. All the rifles were raised in unison, their muzzles rising overboard like hedgehogs, each one maintaining a delicate 10-degree upward angle. The commotion in the water tank intensified. The Americans endured, still refraining from making any formal announcements. Lorraine sighed deeply, tightened his grip on Carmen, turned, and returned to the deck. As his shiny leather boots touched the deck, a meaningful sound finally emanated from the corner of the water tank. "That's enough, sir. You're here to do business, but this aggressive attitude sounds like you're preparing for war with America." Lorraine stopped, not even turning back. "Business is the continuation of trust. I thought the French had trust in the Americans, but now it seems that was just wishful thinking." A handsome young man in military uniform stepped out of the crowd, his expression stern. "Since you claim to be a friend of freedom, you should show your sincerity. The tenacious Americans are fighting against the powerful on the entire West Coast. There is a shortage of medical care, and Baltimore is our only hope. You should understand that there is no room for slackness here." "But I don't understand." Lorraine stood on the deck, his back straight. "You regard Baltimore as hope, but you sit back and watch the British blockade the bay, allowing friends who yearn for justice to sink into the sea. Even after my crew and I have experienced life and death and broken through the siege, you still want me to express my sincerity." "What sincerity?" "An arrest warrant signed by the King of England himself." A blush flashed across the young man's handsome face. "You know we only need you to take the initiative to identify yourself." "I have already revealed my identity." Lorraine raised his hand and pointed directly at the rose pirate flag on the top of the mast. "I am a free pirate, an outlaw maniac, Britain's nightmare, the darling of the sea. On the contrary, you, Mr. Officer, have not seen anything that can be called sincerity except for scolding me with your hands clasped on the shore. Come to think of it, I don't even know your name." The young man was stunned. "I'm Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, a lumberjack from Pennsylvania, a colonel in the Continental Army, and aide-de-camp to Commander-in-Chief Washington." Unexpectedly, instead of meeting John Adams, the man in charge of Baltimore, he first met Hamilton, Adams's close friend. Lorraine raised an eyebrow and, with a wave of his hand, ordered the crew to disarm. "Colonel Hamilton, I'm Edward Kenway, a farmer from Louisiana, leader of the Rose Pirates, and freight agent for the governor of Louisiana, the newly appointed Earl of Louisiana, Mr. Galvez." "Freight agent?" "Yes. All the aid the Earl sends to America will be delivered to my hold upon arrival in New Orleans. I will be solely responsible for all subsequent delivery, handling, coordination, and feedback." Lorraine put on a warm, spring-like smile and listened to the clatter of the anchor chain falling into the water. "The Earl is a noble man, and even with regrets, he cannot venture into danger. But he says that justice requires bloodshed, the blood of countless people." He spoke as he walked across the long plank road and stood alone before Colonel Hamilton, looking down at him. "Colonel, I am only a humble messenger on the sea who has voluntarily sacrificed his life and shed his blood for the cause of American justice." Alexander Hamilton, January 11, 1755 July 12, 1804, one of the founding fathers of the United States, one of the drafters of the U.S. Constitution, a financial expert, the first Secretary of the Treasury, and the founder of the American political party system, holds a significant position in the history of American finance, and industry. He was killed in a duel due to party strife. Hamilton was also Washington's right-hand man, serving as his aide-de-camp for a long time during the Revolutionary War. He was also a political ally of John Adams and a key figure in federalism and the Federalist Party. Chapter 241 Everyone is sacrificing for justice. Baltimore, the Waterhouse Parlor. The term waterhouse parlor is an odd one, considering a waterhouse is simply a warehouse with a wet dock or internal pier. Storage is its primary function, not a reception. However, like the Cherbourg Waterhouse, this one has undergone significant renovations, including the addition of a bank facing the street, a vault built underground, and the parlor itself built above it. Clearly, this waterhouse is a bona fide smuggling operation. 4 figures now occupy the parlor: Colonel Hamilton, a champion of justice, a short, stout civilian serving as his deputy, a smuggling captain willing to shed his blood for justice, and the captain's beautiful advisor, Ms. Carmen. They represent the most selfless and noble alliance of liberties in the world today, devoting every moment to the freedom and democracy of 3 million people. Naturally, their conversation is tense, as this is a matter of justice. Mr. Kenway, you said you are Count Galvez's exclusive freight agent. Can I know how much supply you control? It seems that you still doubt the Count's trust in me, Lorraine said helplessly. My cargo is mainly guns, including 1,500 Charleville rifles and 1,000 dragoon pistols per month, the corresponding ammunition and most consumables. The main consumables are military uniforms and bandages, as well as a small amount of poppies. Please understand that poppies are an excellent natural analgesic, and the Count and I have no interest in drug trafficking. I trust the Count's character, Hamilton said. No cannons. If there are cannons, it would be 100%, not 70%. The Colonel nodded. What's the price? The cause of aiding the United States is a cause of human justice. The Count has stated that he cannot charge any fees other than the cost, so the price is much lower than the market price. Lorraine paused. The rifle is priced at £100 each, and the pistol is priced at £50 each. One ship of consumables and ammunition per month is the Count's goodwill. We deliver it for free and don't charge a penny. The short, plump civil servant snorted coldly. What a below-market price. Your offer is much higher than before. High? This unreasonable gentleman who never gave his name. If our offer is higher than the market price in Baltimore, you can simply abandon our supplies and seek cooperation with others. In the vice-chairman's exchange, Carmen naturally took over the conversation, her voice brimming with confidence. Excuse the lady's natural love of fashion. During the break just now, my female companions and I took in the sights of Baltimore. Strangely, the dresses and accessories here are mostly from 1977. I didn't see a single ship other than the military on the huge dock. During the Revolution, the Confederates had no interest in luxury, which disappointed Miss Carmen, who did not want to reveal her last name. The civil servant raised his chin proudly. As for your suggestion of changing partners, it's not that we can't do it, but we're concerned it might hurt the feelings of our French friends. This is very important, because we value friendship, cherish friendship on a desolate dock. Baltimore is the jewel of the crown. On the West Coast, its prosperity is unmatched. Carmen chuckled scornfully. America isn't at peace yet its brilliant politicians have already matured. Mr. Unreasonable, you're such a liar. Same here, Miss Coyote. Carmen, ahem. The argument escalated into a quarrel, with Lorraine and Hamilton speaking out in unison. Carmen lowered her head in feigned guilt. The short, stout official snorted, turned away, and fell silent. The dispute at the reconvened table came to an abrupt end, and Hamilton breathed a sigh of relief. Mr. Kenway, your staff officer reminds me of another honorable lady, Mrs. Adams, right? Mrs. Abigail Smith Adams. I've heard some of her ideas. While a bit idealistic, for a woman, she does have unique perspectives. Hamilton, clearly not expecting to hear the full name of a congressman's wife from a pirate, exchanged a look of surprise with a short, plump official. He straightened his composure, choosing his words carefully. I wonder, Mr. Kenway, I didn't expect I'd be interested in politics. Hamilton could only nod. Lorraine shook his head and smiled. I'd like to tell you that I came to know the independence fighters because I admire them, but that's not the case. No, you two gentlemen are familiar with information dealers, right? Such things were natural. Thanks to the brave and warlike American allies, we have lost important territories south of New York since General Clinton marched south to Savannah. You two may only regard these as the shame of defeat, but for us freight forwarders who are just and do not care about gains and losses, now is different from the past. From New Orleans to Baltimore, starting from crossing the Grand Bahama Island, the entire route has become a hunting ground for the British. We are like a group of rabbits driven into a pack of wolves. If we are not careful, we will be eaten clean, skin and bones. We only have one life, Lorraine said seriously. The Lord gave us life, and our parents raised us to adulthood. No one wants to die in vain. So I tried to find out about my opponent. Maybe because this business is quite valuable, I also got additional information about the drafting committee of the Declaration of Independence as a gift. Subtle humiliation and relief were mixed together, and the expressions of Colonel Hamilton and the short and fat official were a little complicated. But clearly, the more important thing right now was the intelligence Lorraine had revealed. They all wanted to know what had allowed Lorraine to pierce the blockade of the bay, unbroken for over a month, and deliver the precious munitions to the Continental Army. Hamilton swallowed. Mr. Kenway, who are the opponents you're referring to? Have you heard of the Drake family? Lorraine said, changing the subject. That renowned naval family in England? Hamilton nodded. Of course. Francis Drake is their ancestor. He was a legendary pirate in the Caribbean who completed a circumnavigation of the world and defeated the Invincible Armada. He was one of the founders of Britain's maritime power and is still widely respected today. His descendants are also extraordinary. Several generations have held important positions in the Navy and are deeply trusted by the King of England and the British people. Andrew Drake, the previous patriarch of the Drake family, was famous in the Mediterranean and was known as the Lion of the Mediterranean. The Royal Navy built the HMS Lion specifically for him, but unfortunately, she ran into trouble and was undone. His eldest son is the current admiral of the Continental Squadron, Shark Drake. Shark is the youngest major general in active British service. He excels at regional defense, especially at strangling the enemy in defense, so he is called the Anaconda of the Ocean. He was also a master tactician. His best circular formation cooperative defense tactic was called the Shark tactic by his colleagues. The fact that he was able to give his own name to conventional formation tactic shows how skilled he was. Elia has an illegitimate son, Lorraine Drake, a little-known merchant. But I've learned that he was a mercenary in the Halloween fleet during the Battle of the Windward Islands. After the war, his Chamber of Commerce captured a Tyre IV, a Tyre V, and 2 Tyre VI ships. Do you understand under what conditions a mercenary can capture captured ships? Judging from the results, he captured all of them with a Tyre V ship. Even with a superiority in every aspect, the great French were still defeated by a privateer, and a crushing defeat. We are fighting this monster family, gentlemen. The Count told me that the success rate of breaking through the Shark's defensive tactics is less than 60%, and 2/5 of the American ships sent to aid them were captured or sunk in the process. But that was months ago. Baltimore has just been helpless for over a month. Ever since that famous defensive Drake blocked the bay, has any other freight merchant managed to enter before me? Lorraine took a deep breath, stood up, and took Carmen's arm as they left the table. Before leaving, he paused, not looking back. In the contact list given to me by the Earl, my contact should be the respected Congressman Adams. In this case, please tell him my price. My crew members need a reason to die for the United States. I need a reason to sacrifice myself for justice, and adventurers on the sea also need a reason to challenge the impossible. Americans should reevaluate the price of human life, because every gun and every bullet of yours is earned by the lives of freight forwarders. Please don't think that you are the only one sacrificing. For justice, everyone is sacrificing. P.S. Declaration of Independence Drafting Committee, Thomas Jefferson, the third president, leader of the Democratic Party, main drafter of the Declaration, John Adams, the second president, leader of the Federalist Party, Benjamin Franklin, one of the 3 founding fathers, famous scientist, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, the first Secretary of State, played an important role in the Louisiana Purchase. Chapter 242, Vigilance and Ambition. At night, in a small manor outside Baltimore, Colonel Alexander Hamilton and a short, stout official sat in silence. Between them sat a coffee table, its center a candlestick, its candle nearly half burned, illuminating the wine glasses before them, seemingly untouched. Neither the wine nor the people moved, only the candlelight flickered, reflecting the lingering thoughts of the people. The living room door was gently pushed open from the outside, and a dignified woman in a shawl entered, her eyes gentle yet remarkably bright. "John, you've told so many people you'll treat Alexander to drink. If he goes back without a hint of intoxication, tomorrow people won't call you frugal, but stingy." The short, stout official frowned and glanced at the woman. "The country is in turmoil, and Alexander and I are shouldering the heavy responsibility entrusted to us by George. Being slightly tipsy helps us think more clearly, while sitting idle is just a waste of time," the woman insisted. "Abigail, you always convince me," the short, stout official sighed softly, raising his glass. "Alexander, since it's Abigail's order, we'll do it." Colonel Hamilton shook his head, raised his glass, and clinked it lightly with the short, stout officials. "If it weren't for this era, I'd worry the commander would lose the trust of Parliament. As long as Abigail is in politics, no one can surpass her eloquence. That's why men cling to power, my dear Alexander." The woman smiled and bowed in thanks. "You guys chat, I'll make you some coffee." Making coffee was just an excuse. The woman simply hoped to break the deadlock. She knew her husband was facing a problem, and there was no solution except to discuss it with a wise friend. Sure enough, once she closed the door, the conversation naturally began. Colonel Hamilton rubbed his brows painfully. "John, how much do you think what Mr. Kenway said is true?" "Most of it is, especially about the Drake family. I don't know which intelligence dealer can find out so many secrets. Maybe the French gave it to him, maybe, after all, he's related to Count Galvez." The colonel became curious. "Count Galvez? I remember he was the governor of Louisiana, an ordinary nobleman who seemed to have some military talent. He even repelled the British a few days ago. Your intelligence needs to be updated, my friend, the short and fat official stretched lazily. More than a month ago, I went to France on a diplomatic mission and met him in Fontainebleau. He is now a favorite of Louis V and seems to be very close to Queen Marie. By the way, because of the victory in New Orleans, he has been promoted to the first parliament and is now a French nobleman, with his fiefdom in Louisiana, a real earl in the New World, Hamilton said in shock. Is Louis V going to sell out the Americans? It has nothing to do with politics, my friend. At least as far as I know, this promotion has nothing to do with politics or France's ambitions. Galvez is Queen Marie's smuggling agent. You know, Madame Deficit's obsession with the gold can make her do anything crazy. Fortunately, Hamilton breathed a sigh of relief and started thinking again. Galvez is the Queen's agent, and Edward Kenway is Galvez's agent. Could it be that this price increase was instructed by Madame Deficit? From now on, we have to accept this woman's insatiable exploitation. The short and fat official smiled, and a wise look flashed across his face. Actually, I don't care about the Queen's exploitation, he said softly. I only care about whether Sheikh Drake really cut off the sea route. If so, how can we raise more arms for George? From Kenway, have you noticed his ship? A high-speed beige type with wing sails attached. This ship is an elf on the sea. Once it starts running, no one can catch up with it, but he only has one ship after all. As long as it is stable, one ship can bring us a lot. Anyway, the French will not hand over everything to the Continental Army. They only want a weak England, not a strong America. Hamilton suddenly realized, are you going to increase supply by raising prices? The short and fat official raised two fingers proudly. 2 regiments per month, 2,400 rifles. We can only need half as many pistols, but we need to add 12 light artillery pieces, provided that this doesn't affect land trade. That amount, will the French agree? That depends on the Queen's love of money. The short, stout official stood up and looked out the window at the darkening night. To establish a federation, the future government needs absolute strength, and George needs the achievements of a great cause. All of this depends on the strength of the Continental Army. We don't want civil war, but we can't fear it. If we want the British to sit down and negotiate, we must have the courage to crush them. Money is not a problem in these matters, it is the key to ensuring that the people's taxes are not paid in vain. Colonel Hamilton bowed his head in sincere admiration. As expected of you, political tyrant, John Adams. Unfortunately, after waiting all night, Lorraine never got to meet John Adams, the true ruler of Baltimore, and his legendary wife. It was the handsome Colonel Hamilton who brought Lorraine a brand new contract, not a draft, but the final version. This showed the Americans had no intention of negotiating. Lorraine could only carefully read the binding terms before him. Each contract includes 2,400 Charleville rifles, priced at £100 each, 1,200 dragoon pistols, priced at £50 each, and 12 of the latest infantry light artillery pieces, priced at £1,100 each. A free shipload of consumables is also included. No bandages, just uniforms, ammunition, and medicines. Honestly, the price was generous, extremely generous. Under this contract, the Jackdaw's monthly turnover would reach a staggering £313,200. 113,200 British pounds of this was a premium share, and Lorraine's share was uncertain. However, the remaining 200,000 British pounds was solid contractual revenue, and the share had long been determined. Costs were 47,000 British pounds, and profits were 153,000 British pounds, with the Jackdaw receiving 40%, or 61,200 British pounds. After deducting basic expenses and a 40% dividend, Lorraine would personally pocket at least £35,000 per month. That's enough to earn the base amount of an entire Northwestern European branch. And that's just the profit from the contract. The increased supply could only come from the Count's arrangements for Queen Marie, and the Queen's profits were inevitable, so Lorraine's share essentially came from the difference between the new and old contracts. Each rifle cost £24, each pistol £8, and if Lorraine remembered correctly, the difference for each light artillery piece was £200, totaling £25,600. Still splitting the bill 40-60, the Jackdaw would receive £10,240. Excluding expenses, Lorraine's share would be £6,144. a personal income of over £40,000 per contract. Lorraine's heart raced with excitement, but he suppressed it, focusing on calculating the risks inherent in fulfilling the new contract. Risks abounded, starting with the supply. France consistently controlled the Continental Army's inputs, using a 70 hours and 30 minutes split between land and sea as a means of control. Because land-based munitions couldn't be concealed, due to the combat troops' need for supplies, much, if not all, of them would find their way into the front lines, ultimately becoming losses. This was the smuggling method that suited the French perfectly. The Continental Army had complete control over its numbers of troops, and until peace truly arrived, the nascent United States had to keep them under its thumb. Unfortunately, however, the risks on land were too great. The enemy lines were intertwined, and the forests were teeming with loyal Indians. If supplies were lost, the Americans would undoubtedly deny them, and France would bear all the losses. The situation was different at sea. Sea merchants were mostly free agents, adhering to the principle of first come, first served. With profits comparable, France was truly guaranteed to make a profit. For this reason, even though land-based smuggling was more in line with national interests, the majority of supplies were ultimately diverted to sea, though the quantity remained limited, more than enough equipment for one regiment, but far too few for two. This number was barely enough to support the Continental Army's preparation of new main corps. Ordinary line corps were adequate, but their offensive capabilities were too weak to be kept hidden. The new contract targeted precisely this French tactic. 2,400 rifles and 1,200 pistols were just enough to form a fully staffed line regiment and an elite grenadier regiment. Even 12 light artillery pieces were the standard equipment needed to bolster the grenadier regiment's offensive capabilities. Once the two corps were established, the line corps could reinforce the front lines, while the grenadiers would strengthen the Continental Army's foundation and build its capacity for independent decisive battles. The Americans were eager to become the true protagonists of their own war, and this ambition was clearly evident in the new contract. Would Count Galvez agree? For some reason, Lorraine had a vague feeling that the answer was yes. The price was simply too tempting. While the Continental Army's strength might harm French interests, it would benefit the French. The Count and his queen would both profit handsomely from this expansion. With such compelling reasons, what could the Count complain about? The second issue is the settlement clause. The new contract required the United States to use the Continental Army's reputation as a guarantee, deferring settlement until each contract was fulfilled, rather than the traditional method of settling for each ship, with both payment and goods. This was likely a sign that the Americans were beginning to recognize the risks of maritime shipping, as outlined by Lorraine. They hoped to use the new contract to build a new army, so they sought to pressure Count Galvez into guaranteeing the full fulfillment of the contract by withholding payment, lest the maritime shipping losses led to abortion. This clause was essentially meaningless to Lorraine. As the weaker party, caught between two powers, Lorraine had no room for failure. If success were the prerequisite, the Americans would not default on their payments, much less renege on them. Whether the payment was made early or late, the payment would be settled. Furthermore, the same clause also appeared in Lorraine's contract with the Count, meaning that the Count was the only one truly bearing the financial risk, and the only one harmed by this clause was the Count. The most crucial aspect of the new contract, and the one Lorraine was most concerned about, was the fulfillment period. Traditionally, the fulfillment period for U.S. French smuggling was 1 month, equivalent to the time it takes to cross the Atlantic, ensuring uninterrupted trade and business. However, Lorraine only had a jackdaw for this smuggling operation, and he needed to consider cargo hold and rest periods. The increased munitions quota could be accommodated through adjustments. If the jackdaw reluctantly forgoes its upper deck firepower, freeing up the forecastle gun bays and some of the store holds, the entire cargo could still be transported in 2 trips. Adding a shipload of consumables would still keep the total number of round trips to 3. However, time was of the essence. Without any obstacles, the Jackdaw's round trip between New Orleans and Baltimore would take approximately 9 days. Given current sea conditions, 2 more days would be necessary to ensure safety. This 12-day trip was not a viable option. Lorraine intended to wait for Bell's recovery while exploring whether there were any new changes in Shaq's tactics. Little Cayman, as a starting point, was far farther than New Orleans. However, with an 11-day round trip and a 33-day contract cycle, he still couldn't complete the contract within the traditional deadline. The crew couldn't operate non-stop at sea. Continuous sailing would accumulate fatigue, which would reduce concentration and thus reduce their ability to maneuver, ultimately increasing the risk of sailing. In other words, haste makes waste. Lorraine pondered for a moment, then raised his head and met Captain Hamilton's gaze. Colonel, I understand your reasoning for simply bringing the original new contract, but if you want me to sign and agree, we need a supplementary agreement. Supplementary? Hamilton was surprised and displeased. Yes, supplementary, Lorraine said slowly, as if he hadn't noticed him. The supplementary agreement mainly covers two aspects. First, given the tense situation at sea, I hope the new contract will be executed within 45 days, rather than the traditional 30. Hamilton's anger deepened. Mr. Kenway, are you kidding me? 2 trips in 3 months, and we haven't received the arms we requested. A new contract means nothing to us. No, no, no. You have to understand that only arms that arrive safely in Baltimore are American arms. Otherwise, they're just sacrifices to the sea, and some will become pawns of the British. Lorraine shook his finger and smiled softly. The training and combat of elite troops will cause losses. Using them full-time won't benefit logistics, so I've tailored a second clause of the supplementary agreement for you. It states that between every 2 contract periods, we'll ship an additional shipload of arms, primarily rifles and pistols, in varying quantities. But for this one, we'll count it according to the old contract. Chapter 243 Business Valve. The new smuggling contract with Baltimore went smoothly, including the supplementary agreement drafted by Lorraine, which had already been approved by John Adams at noon and incorporated into the official text. In the watership's reception room, Lorraine signed Edward Kenway's name on behalf of the supplier, while Hamilton replaced John Adams, who had never formally appeared before Lorraine, as the direct representative of the Continental Army. The contract was signed in duplicate, and both parties had equal rights to terminate the contract at any time, while also assuming the obligation to fulfill the current contract. After a simple ceremony, the priceless parchment scroll became Lorraine's possession. The sturdy American soldiers began to unload the ship's munitions in an orderly and swift manner, replacing them with soybeans and corn, filling the entire hold with these 2 inexpensive grains. This was Lorraine's request. They would serve as a talisman for the Jackdaw on the return voyage. Since the beginning of the Revolutionary War, smuggling in Central America and the Caribbean has exhibited a peculiar, valvular nature, unimpeded access from North America to the Caribbean islands, but limited access from the islands to the mainland. The latter situation aligns with global perceptions of the situation in the New World. With a raging war in North America, smuggling was in great demand, often involving munitions and other war-related supplies. Britain, entrenched in the seas, naturally refused to allow anything detrimental to British interests to fall into the hands of the rebels. The former, however, far exceeded many expectations. Continental island trade, distinct from purely legal or illegal, this import-export trade, disguised as humanitarianism, has long been a blatant illegality veiled in legality. The Caribbean islands are perhaps the most developed colonial region in the world today, with plantations teeming with lucrative cash crops on limited land. Because white people forbid it, islanders are deprived of the right to produce and sell their own produce. With little farmland to be seen, food, daily necessities, and even fresh water must be imported from outside the islands. Basic needs form the backbone of trade. Smuggling, a universal business that was difficult to profit from, had a low barrier to entry, low risk, and was particularly suitable for widespread participation. This business flourished from the time immigrants arrived in the New World. Today, its scale and significance far surpass those of northwestern Europe's coastal trade, supporting thousands of New World merchants. Anything that floated could be smuggled, anything that smuggled could be profitable, anything that made money could be used to buy ships, and anything that could be bought could be used to float, a perfect closed loop. More importantly, the pirates roaming New World waters generally had a positive attitude toward the Japanese consumable smuggling. Few pirates targeted these smugglers, whose profits were limited. The navies of various countries, depending on them for their livelihood, were willing to assist them whenever possible. Even Shark, who strategically blocked the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay, could not easily target the Japanese consumables. The reason was simple: Bermuda was also a destination for land-to-island trade. If this route were completely blocked, Shark would first face the critical problem of supplying his fleet. This presented Lorraine with an opportunity. July 8, 1779, sunset. Flying the distinctive flag of a Japanese frigate, depicting corn and wheat, the Jackdaw departed Baltimore and swaggered toward the tightly blocked entrance to the bay. As expected, the Jackdaw passed directly within the Lion's field of view at the narrow entrance without encountering any harassment. On the subsequent southbound voyage, they were subjected to only 2 routine inspections by patrolling British ships, and without even a chance to bribe, they were simply allowed to proceed. They sailed at lightning speed on calm seas, completing the journey from Baltimore to New Orleans in just 4.5 days. Upon officially entering New Orleans harbor, everyone on board breathed a sigh of relief. For the next 2 days, rest and recuperation. Everyone except the duty officer is allowed free movement. The Jackdaw will depart port promptly at 7 a.m. on July 15th. Remember, no one will be waiting after the deadline. After announcing the order, Lorraine handed 3 copied tactical manuals to Catalina, Belle, and Kren. Take them with you and study them carefully. This will be our primary task for a long time to come, and it concerns the survival of the entire ship. All 3 nodded emphatically. Lorraine knew his sailors were discerning and didn't need to dwell on even the most important matters. So he chuckled. Next, Belle, remembered to have Pierce resign the contract. Kren, remove the excess firepower from the ship as agreed on the way. Catalina, go get old Barry and receive the latest intelligence. Carmen, prepare a carriage. We must rush to Baton Rouge as soon as possible. The Count is our golden child, and we can't neglect him. Half a day later, at the Galvez Manor. The Count's manor had been rather lackluster lately. This place was originally a temporary residence he purchased upon his arrival in the New World. Its size and elegance were unworthy of his Count status. After all, he had no intention of staying in the New World for long, simply wanting to end his ill-fated tenure quickly and secure the position of Privy Council he so desired. No one could have imagined that the desolate New France would become the site of his prosperity. First, British General Clinton marched south, shifting the center of the war from the north to its present-day south. Then, New Orleans became the British's target, with elite Red Army troops and a swarm of Indians swarming in. The combined efforts of foolish Spain and the even more foolish army of Baton Rouge had driven him into a corner. To avoid becoming a criminal of France, the Count gritted his teeth and embarked on the greatest adventure of his life. He would stop smuggling, a business that was generating enormous profits for the entire French aristocracy. He even brazenly used the lucrative profits as bait to manipulate the entire army of Baton Rouge and tens of thousands of smugglers into his hands. That period was truly the darkest hour of his life. He walked on thin ice, consumed with worry. He often woke in the middle of the night with the same dream, a guillotine towering over the Seine. It was then that the Count finally came to his senses. Petty patriotism was worthless. To bring glory to France, he first had to learn to survive. In the days that followed, the Count began to build a retreat. Leveraging some connections he had made back home, he quickly connected with Queen Marie. His wife had dispersed generations of family wealth, barely securing a foothold with the lady, catapulting her into the ranks of the prestigious nobility. The Queen was a divinely favored being. With her goodwill, everything began to work out for him, including the treacherous assassination attempt that left a scar on his eyebrow. It was during that assassination that he met the eccentric smuggler Edward Kenway. After that, there was nothing to remember. Success was natural, victory was natural. He had prepared the Queen's case, and she rewarded him with abundant rewards. At Fontainebleau, with that gracious victory, he transcended the class divide and joined the sacred First Council. His fiefdom lay in the seemingly desolate, yet in fact, fertile Louisiana. He rose to prominence, becoming lord of this land, the foremost nobleman in France. His former estate no longer suited his status. Thousands of acres were acquired, and the foundation of his new, opulent mansion had only just been laid. How long would it take to move into a new home worthy of his status? Count Galvez was daydreaming when he heard the hurried footsteps of his butler. "What's the matter, master? Mr. Kenway is here." Kenway. Edward Kenway. The butler had never heard of Lorraine's alias before, and seeing the Count's astonishment, his first thought was that Lorraine was a fraud. He asked tentatively, "Master, this Mr. Kenway said he had an appointment with you 2 weeks ago. If it is false, appointment." The Earl woke up as if from a dream. "He said an appointment, not a report." "It is an appointment," the butler confirmed. "If you don't want to see him, no, bring him in. Mr. Kenway is my guest, and that appointment." "Yes, I remember, it really happened." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244, Bewitching People. A fresh parchment lay spread out on Count Galvez's desk, its top edge resting on a wineglass, its bottom edge resting on a pocket watch. On the left hand of the watch was the signature of Edward Kenway in French, and on the right hand, the cursive English name of Alexander Hamilton, inscribed in a beautiful handwriting, a true reflection of the man himself. However, no one was behind the desk. Lorraine sat on the sofa, drinking, Carmen sitting beside him in a dignified manner. The Count stood by the window, his eyes wandering as he gazed at the construction site in the distance. "Kenway, I'm here. Do you know why the Americans agreed to this price?" "I know a little bit, tell me about it." Lorraine set down his wineglass, stood up, and cleared his throat. "First, the blockade," he whispered. "I don't know whether the Earl has monopolized all the business to Baltimore or the British blockade is really effective. In any case, judging from the situation at the dock, there are very few smuggling ships in Baltimore." "Your guess is actually correct," the Earl said, something that surprised Lorraine. "Baltimore is the designated port of the Continental Army. We are indeed the only one conducting maritime trade with the Continental Army at this stage, but the Chesapeake Bay is not Baltimore Bay. There are many ports in Virginia and Maryland, especially Norfolk in Virginia and Annapolis in Maryland. The scale of trade is no smaller than that of Baltimore. State militia, Maryland has the reputation of being an old front state, and Virginia is the core war zone. The two states have a huge demand for arms and militia. They are areas that truly fought to the death for the founding of the country." "Then I understand the British behavior." Lorraine solved a puzzle. "Baltimore, Annapolis, Norfolk, and those small ports with private smuggling. We have many friends, but I guess apart from us, other trade lines are still in the traditional model of subcontracting and distribution, fighting on their own. The more smuggling ships there are, the greater the power of the fleet's joint defense. The visible gains will attract more and more attention from the British. Just like rotten meat placed there will always attract jackals to stop." The Count smiled. "It seems that the first reason is established, blockade. The Americans probably thought that we suffered huge losses, so you had a lucky breakthrough. After all, the losses in Maryland and Virginia are real, and the ship sank into the water. God knows where she originally wanted to go. Then, ambition." Lorraine stretched out his second finger. "Each contract can arm a standard grenadier regiment. If 4 are established, the Continental Army will have the strength to organize a campaign. 10 will be enough to lead the line and militia to launch a series of battles at the level of Clinton's southward operation, which will help to establish the prestige of the Continental Army. Since you can see this, you must also see France's needs." The Count turned to look at Lorraine. "America and France are friends, good friends. We helped them stand up and taught them to walk, but if at all possible, we only hope they never learn. But children must learn to walk." Lorraine stared back, unyielding. "And before they do, they've already learned to speak and possess the ability to express their wishes. If France refuses to teach them to walk, it's time for them to find new friends." The Count's eyes suddenly sharpened. "Edward Kenway, you're a well-informed little man. Could it be that in some dark and shadowy place, you've heard rumors that none of us have? Is it Spain? Portugal? Denmark? The Netherlands? Why not England?" Lorraine was completely unfazed by the Count's influence, and even seemed more relaxed. He paced back to the sofa, picked up his wineglass from the coffee table, and shook the ice cubes inside. "Carmen, do you know the history of the War of Independence?" Carmen never hesitated at such a crucial moment. In 1773, Bostonian Samuel Adams violently dumped a Tea Party. In 1774, the Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. In 1775, gunshots rang out in Lexington, and the militia and the British Army officially clashed. A few months later, the Second Continental Congress issued the Declaration of Independence, and the United States of America was established. "Enough, enough." Lorraine smiled and patted Carmen's shoulder, turned around lazily, and looked at the Count for the second time. "France is always overconfident, but it doesn't know the root of America's resistance to Britain. This war is like an adolescent child rebelling against his father. No matter how fierce the argument is, the father is still the father. Count, please recall this war as objectively as possible. The violence, the quarrels, the violence, the leaving home. Doesn't the whole process look like a family farce? It's okay for France to get involved when the child is wandering, and it's okay to give him a stick and teach him to fight. However, a child who can't survive independently will always miss home. When he misses home, he will forget the unhappiness of leaving and his father's determination, and he will be humble and beg for mercy. What can France get? Hatred. Lorraine raised his hand and raised his glass to the sky. The father hates France for instigating the child, and the child hates France for her seductive words. Neighbors and friends watching this joke will only think that France is stupid, hopelessly stupid. There is only one way to prevent the child from returning home. Make him strong, make him independent, make him remember France as his teacher, and replace the image of his father in his heart. What's more, we can arouse his desires, make him think about his father's property, and make him feel that everything should belong to him. Desire. Desire is the original sin, something not even the Lord and the Father can erase from the human heart. Once it takes root, there's no turning back from family ties, and only hatred and fear will permeate them. This is what France should strive for. The study was eerily quiet. Lorraine remained silent, Carmen smiled without saying anything, and the Count, with a gloomy expression, walked back to his desk and, in silence, gazed at the brand new contract. Is this why you dared to sign this new contract? No, Lorraine replied matter-of-factly. My goal was simply to make money. Everything before was just gossip. Can gossip be so deceptive? Lorraine laughed. He knew the Count was close to agreeing. All that was needed now was the final push to sweep away everything that had accumulated, sweeping away the Count's shame and patriotic fervor along with it. He whispered, Count, you are wrong, it's not my words that are bewitching, but your patriotism. Patriotism? Bewitching? Is it strange? Lorraine waved his hand and asked Carmen to refill his wine. I guess you're hesitating about how to get today's gossip to His Majesty's desk, so that he can understand your loyalty, your kindness, and of course, your ability. Yes, let me guess again. You are probably frustrated to find that there is no suitable channel around you. The only one you can rely on seems to be the Queen, and the Queen, what? That lady is very good, smart, beautiful, educated, and skillful. She also has a good family, which ensures the weight of her voice in politics. However, you don't want to rely too much on her. Nepotism is just helpless. If possible, you still hope to become a pillar of a political association and use your own talents rather than the trust of the ruler to serve the country. The Count felt his mouth dry and bitter. He wanted to stop Lorraine from speaking, but also wanted to know what Lorraine wanted to say. He downed the wine on the desk in one gulp, letting the spicy taste glide through his mouth. Isn't that what I think wrong? It's not a question of right or wrong, it's just the same question. Joan of Arc must have thought about it too, saying, Madam, the Count heard Joan of Arc from Lorraine for the second time. The conversation was completely different from the last time, and it carried a completely different meaning. You mean, I will die alone like the saint? The end of a political career, in a sense, is probably the same. Lorraine leaned over the sofa. Your life is finally going as you wish, but you've forgotten who brought you happiness. The Count suddenly woke up. That's right. He had paid a huge price to defend all of France in exchange for the Queen's support, and he had forgotten such a crucial thing. Bernardo de Galvez, first Count of Louisiana, first member of the French Parliament, a rapidly rising political star during the reign of Louis V. His image was already set, a flatterer, a sycophant, a traitor, a favorite. None of him had any connection to integrity, and he could never shake the Queen's stigma. This was his own choice, a choice he felt no regrets about, yet now he'd almost forgotten it completely. Queen Marie was his support, not the king. Loyalty to the Queen was his loyalty, not to France. What did the Queen want? Did she want France to be strong and prosperous? In her heart, France was probably already strong. Did she want King Louis to be prestigious and revered? In her heart, her husband was probably already prestigious and revered. The Count had met Queen Marie, and though their conversation was brief, he was certain that this was her sentiment. The Habsburg noblewoman was by no means foolish, but she had lived a life detached from the world, and had been so for years, never to be brought back. She only wanted money. The Count glanced at the contract and whispered, Is this the gift you've prepared for me? A gift or a step, who knows? I just want the goods. Someone will bring the goods you need. Now tell me, is this a gift? Lorraine seemed oblivious to the Count's words, muttering to himself. For a money-loving queen, smuggling must be very important, right? Here she has her agents and distributors, but I wonder who she thinks is the most trustworthy. Chapter 245 Sense of Crisis. Once he sensed a crisis, Count Galvez's thinking and execution became astonishing. The next day, the missing 900 rifles, 200 pistols, and 12 light artillery pieces were delivered to Lorraine's rented warehouse by a group of unfamiliar workers. Along with the guns and ammunition came a proud young clerk, head held high, presenting Lorraine with a long-term supply contract. The contract's contents didn't surprise Lorraine much. The supplier was Queen Marie's dealer, who controlled 30% of the smuggled goods and operated on a primitive subcontracting model. He always had stock on hand, and Lorraine's needs were rare. The delivery period was 45 days, matching the Baltimore contract. As Lorraine had expected, the price was the so-called market standard, the purchase price from the old Baltimore contract. Honestly, this approach bordered on extortion. The difference between the gun's ex-factory price and the final selling price was the profit. In Charleville's case, the profit on a single gun was £54. In a normal trading chain, this price difference clearly couldn't be monopolized by one company. Lorraine and the Earl employed a special arrangement of goods first, payment later, with a 40-60 split. The Drake Chamber of Commerce took 40%, while the Earl shouldered the financial risk before settlement. Mainstream smuggling, on the other hand, operates in reverse. Because suppliers are unwilling to assume any risk in transactions and generally don't engage in franchise agreements, smugglers often demand 50% or 60% of the profits, and on particularly high-risk routes, even 70%. Lorraine didn't know how the Earl negotiated with a distributor, but it was clear he wouldn't reveal the details of the new contract. If it were limited to the old contract, the Earl's explanation would be very limited, simply that the buyer had a greater demand and needed to source some of the supply from outside. If it were a one-time deal, it would be natural for the source to take all the profits. But now it was a long-term supply contract, and even without considering the Earl's status as an agent and the Earl of Louisiana's reputation, a reasonable profit sharing was essential. This was what made this pricing so interesting. Carmen flipped through the contract with her pinky raised, her pretty nose wrinkling slightly. That dealer, Carlton von Habsburg, she couldn't hide the surprise on her face. It turns out that even the most prestigious families can give birth to fools. Lorraine yawned lazily. That lady is Habsburg's daughter. I guess she feels at ease knowing she has her own money, short-sighted business philosophy, Carmen said bluntly. But my dear President, why did you try to provoke the Count in Baton Rouge? He can't replace the trust of blood, and even if he did, it wouldn't bring us much benefit, because the Count is a fighter. Lorraine smiled as she watched the warehouse get increasingly full. The Count is an excellent man, intelligent, reliable, and adept at manipulating people, as evidenced by the defense of New Orleans, but he has a major flaw, a weak character and a tendency to be complacent. He's easily corrupted when there's no external threat. While we're walking on a tightrope in the Atlantic, he's busy managing his new estate, doing it all himself. A man like that can't be our defense, so I have to cheer him up. He'll take the lion's share of the pay and do something useful. He leaned closer to Carmen, inhaling the refreshing fragrance of her hair, and pointed to a line in the contract. Carmen looked curiously. Payment is settled within 60 days, with compound interest calculated at 1.7% per day for overdue payments, a privilege of receiving goods first and then paying. Lorraine shrugged. See, our Count still has some respect. If not him, who would have persuaded the great Habsburgs to take the risk for a mere smuggling operation? While Lorraine was busy scrambling for supplies, the others on board were also busy. New Orleans was a city of freedom, a place of bright lights, revelry, and lust. The most common establishments here are bars, from gleaming, high-end liquor stores to stinking speakeasy taverns, found throughout the town's streets and alleys. Barabas's Daydream is a speakeasy, tucked away in a dark, unassuming alleyway, operating a humble business. At night, Belle pushed open the bar's swinging doors, shoved past a drunken crowd, and took a seat at the bar. 1 rum, 2 tablespoons of tomato juice, and a teaspoon of salt. The bartender raised an eyebrow and looked over. Sir, I think I've never heard of that drink before. Did the Frenchman invent it? The lion. The waiter quickly approached and ushered him into a semi-enclosed booth in a corner of the bar. Someone had arrived earlier than him, and judging by his expression, it was Sergeant Armani, who had stood guard for Shack in Plymouth. Of course, He had now been promoted to captain of the Lion's assault boats, even holding the rank of captain. When Bell saw that it was an old acquaintance, he immediately showed his true colors. He threw himself onto the sofa and slammed his boots on the round table with a bang. "Captain Armani, why did the Admiral send you here?" Armani scratched his head shyly. "A few days ago, the Admiral received a letter from the Major from the No. 3 formation. Because the Lion was still at sea, there were not many people around him who could be used for personal matters, so he chose me, Tisk, in order to take control of the fleet as soon as possible. All the old people were sent away. If not, you wouldn't be able to contact the Admiral so quickly." "That's right." Bell retracted his legs helplessly. "Let's talk about business first." Lorraine secretly participated in the smuggling of arms to the Continental Army on a large scale. "I heard that all the marine goods were in charge." Cyrillic letter A. "He committed treason." "It can't be called treason, right? The person in charge of the smuggling is nominally a Louisiana farmer named Edward Kenway, who has nothing to do with Lorraine Drake, a shield." "No, Edward is himself." Cyrillic letter D. "Isn't that treason? Fake identity, black ship, and beautiful disguise." Bell scratched his ear in disgust. "As long as he's not caught, who can connect a sneaky smuggler with the most popular Lee Francois hero recently? Is it a false accusation?" Armani's mind was a little confused. Lorraine Drake was involved in smuggling, and single-handedly took charge of the most feared Continental Army. The Admiral's core defense recently is to crack down on smuggling. Could it be that the Admiral has known about Lorraine Drake for a long time, and the purpose of cracking down on smuggling is to persuade him to mend his ways? Bell's heart was as if he were dead for a moment. He sighed deeply. "Anyway, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, you go to the Port Authority to dispatch a Spanish merchant ship named the Jackdaw. That is Lorraine's smuggling ship. The registered owner is named Analinka, who is the alias of the great Spanish pirate Catalina Dubo. Her current identity is Lorraine's first mate. A permanent contact person must be set up in New Orleans. I will send a message before each voyage. The next one will be at 8:30 tomorrow morning. According to the plan, the one-way trip from here to Baltimore takes 11 days. The outbound trip usually does not exceed 8 days, and the normal time is 7 days. The Admiral can arrange the defense according to this time." At this point, Bell's eyes suddenly became sharp. "Armani, here, the problems between the Drake brothers are very complicated. Even if you are a trusted subordinate, I advise you not to get involved easily. Your task is to pass on my intelligence to the Admiral, exactly as it is. As for whether to arrest or release, that is the Admiral's business. You don't need to ask." "Yes." Armani was terrified by Bell's gaze. Such a strong man, his voice trembled. "What if, Major, what if the Admiral asked for my opinion? Did you see what happened to me? Because I was too nosy, I ate the soil at Lucy's plantation for a whole month, and it almost became fertilizer for the high-altitude coffee beans. These brothers are dangerous. You must learn to be loyal and keep your distance." "Yes, yes, Major." Over an hour later, a drunk Bell staggered out of the bar and disappeared at the end of the dark alley. A long time later, Hannah's murmurs could be heard from the shadows of the bar roof. 2 consecutive days, at the same time, at the same bar, with no other unusual plans. Looks like I'll have to take up some of Desai and Solander's time next time. Bell Judea, I have a feeling he's hiding something. Chapter 246 Navigator. July 16th, the Jackdaw, its cargo holds remodeled and laden with guns and cannons, reeking of motor oil, embarked on its second voyage to Baltimore. This meant that the Jackdaw, already short on firepower and boasting only speed, was further stretched in terms of combat effectiveness. However, there was no other way. The crated rifles took up space, and the unlanded light artillery took up even more. Each hold could only carry 200 rifles, 400 pistols, and 2 light artillery pieces. The Jackdaw originally had 7 holds, more than enough to complete the old contract totaling 10 holds in 2 trips. However, expecting to complete the new contract for 21 holds in the same trip was sheer wishful thinking. The renovation became a necessity. Lorraine and Crone discussed for a long time and removed 8 9-pounder guns from the Jackdaw's upper deck, freeing up 2 compartments. They also removed 4 12-pounder guns from the gun bays closest to the bow, freeing up 1 compartment. Finally, they squeezed in one of the 6 water tanks, barely amassing 11 cargo holds to meet the requirements of the new contract. However, this left the Jackdaw with only 8 12-pounder guns on each side, and its water supply dropped from 30 days to 25. While the impact on endurance might not be significant, its artillery capabilities plummeted to a dismal state. For the sake of money, Lorraine could only console himself by thinking that the Jackdaw's artillery had always been like a child with a sledgehammer, relying entirely on accidental kills to achieve success. Now, it had simply been reduced from a child to a baby. As long as the sledgehammer remained, the actual effectiveness wouldn't make much difference. In short, the child with the sledgehammer finally rose to the occasion, happily sprinting towards a comfortable life. Considering the lengthy nature of smuggling and the potential for tangible Chamber of Commerce duties, Lorraine began his training as a reserve captain early on. This time, the captain on duty was Catalina, who, with reference to Lorraine's noble phantasm for brothers, was entrusted with all calculations and orders along the way. However, they soon discovered that command and planning weren't Lorraine's only core value on board. Compared to captain, the position of navigator was a more serious shortfall. Navigators, the ocean guides of this era, were primarily responsible for charting, navigational orientation, and ship positioning. They were often skilled in mathematics and drawing, and expertly used specialized tools such as sextants, compasses, and pencils. Exceptional individuals could also modify or create professional charts using limited coordinates and observations. It was their responsibility to translate the captain's intentions into a charted route, and it was also their duty to correct course during the voyage to ensure the ship remained on course in the vast ocean. The navigator was the most specialized position on board, and it also had the highest entry threshold. Lorraine's ships were always short of navigators. For a long time, Lorraine was the only option at the professional level, with Belle only recently joining the fray. The remaining captains, such as Katerina, Acheron, Kren, and Pierce, were severely lacking in both skill sets and talent, barely qualifying as amateurs, barely managing to keep their ships within their course. This was why, despite the fact that the butterfly flower had left long before, it was still Lorraine, towing Henna, who reached shore earlier, relying on human effort. The foggy conditions were unique, and Lorraine had never encountered any problems in unfamiliar waters. So, after years together, the crew had completely overlooked the issue. But this time, the problem finally surfaced. With Lorraine's help as the prerequisite, the three backup smuggling captains gathered and invited Lorraine to sit in to discuss their plans. In the ship's dining room, Belle scratched his head in frustration, watching Lorraine's smirk. Under the current circumstances, the captain and I can't leave the Jackdaw at the same time. But my primary responsibility is the steering, especially when we need to cut through the wind at super high speeds, and we don't have a helmsman capable of replacing me on board. Kren tapped the table irritably. You're the only pilot, the only helmsman capable of cutting through the wind at super high speeds. Can't you focus on both? Belle shrugged. If we had the coast as a reference, I'd just focus on the compass, which would be fine. But if we're out in the open sea, without a reference point, that wouldn't be possible. That means our calculations must be flawless. Aside from the foray into the bay, we can't alert any British at any other time. Is that correct? Catalina tried to summarize. Kren and Belle considered it and nodded heavily. That's settled, Catalina clapped her hands. From today on, Judea will only be steering at super high speeds. The rest of the time, he'll primarily serve as navigator, with no replacement. Also, she paused, then turned to Lorraine and solemnly suggested, as captain of this voyage, Mr. President, given the irreplaceable nature of both of Belle Judea's duties, I propose that he be formally removed from the captain's rotation. Kren and Belle exchanged a glance and said in unison, second. Since the three captains agree on a replacement, Lorraine shrugged nonchalantly. I have no objection. The Jackdaw's command rotation was adjusted. Belle was removed from the captain's rotation, while his captain's internship shift was reassigned to first navigator and second helmsman. Henna was demoted from lookout to first helmsman, and Pierce was appointed first lookout. With the position changes complete, the ship set sail again, though the atmosphere suddenly became tense. After all, this was Lorraine's flagship. From the seaman to the core crew, everyone on board was an adult, possessing common sense, maintaining an optimistic attitude, and anticipating worst-case scenarios. Everyone understood that anything with a probability of happening would eventually happen. Therefore, Lorraine could leave the ship temporarily for some reason, and the smuggling operation would remain unstoppable. In that case, they would have only themselves to rely on. Everyone treated the training round as a real battle, as if Lorraine were truly absent. Unfamiliar with the dynamics of the circle formation, Catalina repeatedly calculated. When judgment proved difficult, Belle charted a course, taking a long detour around the outer edges of the formation. Through careful action and unwavering unity, they successfully reached the breakthrough point at the center of the sixth circle on the morning of the seventh day, just one day later than Lorraine's planned sailing schedule, far exceeding Lorraine's expectations. Then, as they waited for nightfall, Catalina struck lucky. On the mastheads on either side of the maintop lookout, Lorraine, Catalina, Kren, and Belle stood side by side, like a group of chattering sparrows, each holding a telescope, motionless as they gazed at the distant sails. Within the telescope were 3 ships, 1 large and 2 small, advancing slowly in a V-shaped formation. The large ship was a galleon-class destroyer of the same class as the Golden Hind, while the 2 smaller vessels were identical brigantines. The entire formation defied conventional formation principles, giving it a somewhat odd appearance. They had entered the Jackdaw's field of view 4 hours earlier, traveling east to west, traversing the entire sixth circle from the depths of the Atlantic, advancing in a nearly straight line toward the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. Logically, they should have spotted the Jackdaw, lying in wait in the center of the ocean. However, the Jackdaw's mainmast was slightly taller than that of a Class V galleon of its type, and the current captain had been timid, unwilling to encounter an unfamiliar fleet at sea. So, Belle, the navigator and helmsman, unhesitatingly launched. With the help of Henna and Pierce, he maneuvered the Jackdaw in a classic round dance across the sea, performing a two-way evasion. Using both fleets as reference points, he continuously calculated their field of view and maneuvered in a continuous arc, successfully circling behind the mysterious formation without alerting anyone. It was during this process that Catalina recognized the enemy's flagship. Lorraine decisively broke his restraint on navigational decision-making, his brow furrowed. "Caterina, are you sure? Is she the Bloody Mary, although she doesn't fly the pirate flag, considering the 1740 type 5th level French galleon, the blue and white stern sail, and the red goddess bow? I'm sure she is the Bloody Mary. It really is the Bloody Mary." Lorraine sighed deeply. The pirate king of the Caribbean, Cotton Jack, even he has set his sights on the huge profits of this smuggling business. The update plan for October is 3 updates every 2 days, that is, single updates on odd days at 6 a.m., and double updates on even days at 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. The plan is a bit strange. I originally wanted to go back to double updates, but after trying for a while, I found that I still couldn't handle it, so there is no way. Please forgive me. However, considering my hard work, please subscribe more. Chapter 247 Pirate Thinking. The historical figure of Cotton Jack was a legendary figure who flourished during the golden age of piracy. He was a playboy, heartless, greedy, hypocritical, and cowardly. He likely possessed considerable seamanship skills, having begun his career as a quartermaster on the pirate ship Treasure Trove, essentially managing the cargo hold. He cleverly exploited his position, and while unable to enter the power triangle of captain, helmsman, and pilot, he nonetheless amassed a loyal following. On a rare occasion, he instigated a mutiny on board, exiling the captain and usurping his position, ultimately becoming pirate captain. He was a unique pirate. His brief career as a pirate lacked any notable battles or achievements. He is best remembered for his advocacy and promotion of the Jolly Roger and his love-hate relationship with 2 of his most beloved women, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. His experiences and aspirations seemed unlike those of the traditional mercenary barbarian. Instead, he resembled a minor nobleman striving to navigate social circles and secure a stable life. According to Catalina, the creation of the Jolly Roger brought Cotton Jack immense prestige. Although neither his achievements nor his prowess warranted him the title of Pirate King, an established Pirate King surrendered to him, offering him a token and willingly serving as his assistant. This event shocked the entire pirate world. According to the Pirate Code, Cotton Jack's situation was ultimately judged as collecting the king's token through personal effort. The Sea Brotherhood granted him a 3-month window of opportunity, and pirates from across the Caribbean flocked to him, hoping to rise to prominence. Chaotic, and fierce fighting ensued. At the end of the 3-month period, the former pirate king who had surrendered to him died heroically, while Cotton Jack, during this time, impregnated both of his wives. Thus, the new pirate king was born, and with it, a legend of an era. Surely that was just wishful thinking. The true outcome of this incident was that Cotton Jack's excessively high profile attracted the attention of the Royal Navy. With the financial support of Woodes Rogers, then governor of Jamaica, a pirate raiding party easily cornered him in his path. During the battle, Cotton Jack hid in the cargo hold, leaving the two pregnant pirate princesses to fight the sailors on deck. Ultimately, they were all imprisoned. Cotton Jack was quickly sentenced to death by hanging. After his body dried for several months, Cotton Jack II, who more worthy of being a pirate king, defeated his rival and ascended to the throne. To this day, the title has been passed down to the seventh generation. The Jackdaws' leadership, acting as sparrows, remained gathered at the yardarm, observing the pirate formations in the distance while listening to Lorraine and Catalina casually share the secrets of the pirate world. When they finished, Belle looked at Lorraine with confusion. Captain Debo is the infamous Stigmata, the red-haired Katharina, known as the Red Rose of the Caribbean, right? Yes, I saw intelligence that shortly before we arrived in the New World, she was chosen by the Sea Brotherhood as a candidate for Pirate King Mansfield III, right? Yes, as an insider, it's only natural that Captain Debo knows so much. But you, Lorraine scratched his head sheepishly. It may sound unprofessional, but from the perspective of the code, I'm actually a non-candidate for the 7th Pirate Lord. And as long as I obtain the 3rd scattered token, a new title can be born. Oh, huh? Gentle breeze, tame waves. At the edge of the Jackdaw's vision, the flagship fleet of Pirate King Cotton Jack VI drifted up and down, advancing steadily toward the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. This puzzled everyone aboard the Jackdaw. The Bloody Mary was an old-style galleon of the same type and class as the Golden Hind. Its design coincided with the rise of the French Navy, challenging British naval power. The French led the shipbuilding revolution of that era, with tier versus outmatching tier IVs and tier IIs outmatching tier IIs. While they failed to truly supplant the British as the dominant force at sea, as a ship, that type of galleon destroyer was undoubtedly a classic. However, a classic destroyer was still a destroyer. Its maximum firepower, at 18 pounds, was no match for the cutting-edge tier IIs. Furthermore, the blockade formation consisted of 3 ships, overwhelming the pirate formation in every way. Was Cotton Jack VI unaware of the true nature of the blockade at the mouth of the bay? Lorraine found it impossible. The pirate formation emerged from the depths of the Atlantic. Without knowing the true situation along the east coast of North America, there was no point in their actions. So, was Cotton Jack VI confident in breaking through the shark blockade head-on? If so, Lorraine could only say that the Sea Brotherhood could begin selecting candidates for the 8th. I can't figure it out. Lorraine smacked his lips and looked at Catalina. Any clues? I heard that Cotton VI was originally a Virginia plantation owner, persecuted by the local governor and forced to go to sea. If the rumor is true, he should have supported the Revolutionary War. If his old friends in Virginia needed him, it's understandable that he would risk his life to support the war, but he was preparing to break through the blockade of a third-class ship head-on. Pirates are often confident in their speed. Moreover, Virginia's receiving port is in Norfolk, which is very close to the mouth of the bay. Unlike Baltimore, admittedly, only those who have truly been pirates can understand the pirate's strange and gambler-like mentality. Just because they think they are fast enough, they dare to gamble their lives without hesitation? Lorraine wanted to laugh. He spread his hands nonchalantly. Okay, Mr. Pirate King thinks he can outrun the blockade formation. What about you? When do you plan to see them off? I want to follow. Lorraine raised an eyebrow in surprise. In broad daylight, Catalina nodded solemnly. Just as Cotton VI believed he could definitely escape, I'm also convinced he'll be trapped by the blockade at the mouth of the bay. This is our chance. If we operate correctly, we can buy back half a day of time for this voyage. She then looked at Lorraine, awaiting his final decision. Lorraine stared back in surprise. You're the captain this time. Why are you looking at me when the lives of the entire ship are at stake? Whistles blew, and the sailors took up their posts, sprinting across the deck. Belle took the wheel again, while Hannah and Pierce ascended the lookout. The risky assault was hastily yet decisively executed, a perfect reflection of Katerina's character, impulsive yet courageous. Lorraine wasn't about to interfere with her decision. Even though it still seemed risky to Lorraine, at least far less prudent than a night voyage. But taking risks, those who sail the sea are constantly taking risks. This smuggling operation itself was a huge gamble. Compared to that, a forceful advance under the desperate protection of the pirate fleet wasn't even a risk, it was simply a simple, everyday adventure. Since it's a daily routine, why interfere? Strolling on the ship, Lorraine couldn't help but breathe a sigh of admiration as he admired the crew's selfless and skillful work from a rare bystander's perspective. Since it's level 1 alert, the divination room should no longer be allowed to be used. Otherwise, go get a fortune teller. Before he could make a decision, Henna's cry came over. Distance 24 kilometers, heading southwest, relative speed 4.5 knots, the formation ahead is cutting the wind, just go to Cape Henry honestly? I thought there would be a bolder choice, Lorraine and Catalina said at the same time from a distance. After saying this, Lorraine lazily pushed open the door of the divination room. Catalina stood heroically on the upper deck at the bow and drew out her sword with a clang. Raise the square-rigged sail, set the tarpaulin, and the bowsail. Since they're heading south, our goal is to head north, to Cape Charles, Jackdaw, ambush, P.S. Calico Jack, the legendary pirate whose original name was John Rackham, also known as Calico Jack, was the initiator of the Jolly Roger and a pioneer of the maritime harem. He left behind 2 posthumous children and died in humiliation in 1720. It's worth noting that his 2 consorts, Mary Reed and Anne Bonny, were pregnant when they were captured. The British waited until they gave birth and even arranged for formal care for them in prison. Of course, there was no maternity leave. They were hanged after giving birth, and the children's presence did not mitigate their sentences. Chapter 248 It's Too Ugly. 1779, A Gentle Breeze. It wasn't a special day for Shaq. The line shift still had 8 days to go, and the sun was still high in the sky. Out at sea, the blockading fleet, as usual, was encircling a reckless smuggling fleet. The one-sided battle had raged for over an hour. The blockading fleet's Tier V ship, the Montanrio, had successfully entangled a brigantine, while the Lion had easily penetrated another. Together with the Rhinoceros Beetle, they were using arcing tactics to slowly force the galleon, which bore a striking resemblance to the Golden Hind, into that end near the coast. A rather dull change. Shaq yawned secretly, his mind racing back to that clever little rabbit from 10 days ago. Could that be Lorraine? A veteran of the Third Fleet had luckily hijacked Lorraine's ship, cleverly concealing any clues. Using standard tactics, they extorted £30, giving Bell the opportunity to deliver intelligence on New Orleans. Captain Amani had made a huge haul there. Shaq knew it already. His foolish brother, just as he'd predicted, was taking a desperate risk, choosing the most dangerous route, helping the French deliver munitions to the so-called Continental Army. Lorraine, fortunately, hadn't completely lost his mind. He'd cleverly disguised himself, even switching identities. And the ship? The smuggling vessel was called the Jackdaw, a converted commercial high-speed beechcraft. It had no background, no history, no trading or repair records. It was registered in Port of Spain, and the owner, Don Alinka, was a bona fide, notorious pirate. Shaq was relieved. Despite being a foolish brother, Lorraine's approach remained the same, a blend of boldness and prudence. He seemed adventurous, but he wouldn't easily get into trouble. But, the high-speed beige, the destination Baltimore, the clear and decisive command style, the gifted skill of cutting through the wind. After careful consideration, Shaq concluded that the little rabbit he'd fought that night could only be Lorraine with Bell's support. According to the date, that ship should be somewhere outside the bay. Lorraine likes night raids. If we meet it again, should we sink it? Shaq's muttering happened to float into Captain Armani's ears. The captain remembered Bell's advice and couldn't help shuddering. Admiral, Shaq tilted his head slightly, are we going to wrap it up? The poor captain quickly shook his head. Sorry, Admiral. The encirclement is being steadily established. The captain estimates that it will take about an hour to reach the optimal shooting environment. Has the Montanrio not dealt with her opponent yet? A direct hit has been successfully formed, but the impact position is not very good. Since there is no obvious change, why did the captain ask you to come? To wear down my poor patience. The tone was neither salty nor bland, without any harsh words. Armani's face turned pale, and he felt like his heart was about to jump out of his throat. Report, Admiral, he saluted, legs together, his voice booming. Lookouts have spotted a ship 17 kilometers northeast. It's a high-speed beige, speeding over 12 knots. Expected to pass Cape Charles within 50 minutes, high-speed beige. Amani glanced hurriedly around, then stepped closer, his voice lowered. It has wing sails, modified bowgun ports, and the bow emblem is a raven with its wings folded atop a viper. The raven is newly installed, he swallowed, speaking at top speed. It's the Jackdaw, In truth, Amani didn't need to elaborate. As soon as he heard the obvious sign, the Raven is newly installed, Shaq knew it was Lorraine. Lorraine's choice of a daytime raid was completely unexpected, but not incomprehensible to Shaq. From Lorraine's perspective, he was surely hoping to take advantage of the blockade formation's fierce battle at Cape Henry to slip past Cape Charles, 19 kilometers away. But it was daytime. Within 35 kilometers, the line could detect an incoming ship at any moment. The Jackdaw's ability to safely advance to 17 kilometers under these circumstances was a stroke of luck, but the distance was still far from safe. Instantly, Shaq had a plan in mind. Abandoning the Galen, the rhinoceros beetle charged at full speed against a jackdaw. The lion moved to the center line of the bay's mouth, and Montanlio abandoned evasive maneuvers to focus on the enemy in front of him. The jackdaw had no other advantage except speed. As long as the blockade formation responded with all its might, even if Lorraine and Bell joined forces, they would have no escape in this narrow bay. Should I give the order? Shaq stared at the empty horizon in silence. Captain Armani suppressed his uneasy thoughts. Admiral, Bell needs a permanent contact person. Has Staff Officer Emmons set off? Armani was stunned. He set off last night. I selected 4 capable and reliable stormtroopers to protect him. We told the outside world that we were carrying out a Cape Henry infiltration operation. Cape Henry infiltration? Those country bumpkins, what qualifications do they have? You have always given your subordinates the impression of being cautious and rigid. Although it is a bit unnecessary, there is no doubt in the formation, careful and rigid. Shaq forced a smile without any smile. I'm not the commander of the formation, nor should I be responsible for improvising any situation. Captain Amani, don't think I'll let you off the hook just because you're my old subordinate. Tell the captain to put aside these unnecessary concerns and focus on the enemy. If he thinks the situation warrants it, then seize that clipper. If not, tell him that victory is achieved in his stomach, while what the lookout sees is just a wisp of cooking smoke. Yes, sir. The Jackdaw, cheered on by the South Shore's artillery fire, soared into the Chesapeake Bay, its graceful and voluptuous form leaving a long, chaotic trail of waves off Cape Charles. The blockading formation made no apparent response, acting as if they hadn't noticed, simply executing their conventional tactics step by step. Another hour later, the Montanlio was fooled by the enemy's feint maneuver without warning. The battered brigantine, like a warrior ready to die, charged directly into the battle group of the Lion and Bloody Mary. The ship hoisted the Union flag as it advanced. The red and white flag spread out in the sea breeze, and on the azure corners, 13 state stars sparkled. The Bloody Mary seized the opportunity in time, and with the cover of the brigantine, it endured a round of close-range artillery fire from the rhinoceros beetle and forced its way out of the encirclement. As Catalina said, pirates always have a talent for speed that the Navy does not have. After breaking out of the net, the Bloody Mary opened its sails and quickly found a suitable angle to cut, and the ship's speed increased sharply to 8 knots. By the time Montanlio, who had lost the enemy, and the rhinoceros beetle, who had turned around, came to their senses, the Bloody Mary had already escaped far away, fleeing to Norfolk Bay with smoke and scars, and there was no possibility of pursuit. On the messy deck, the sturdy Cotton Jack Villa stared at the United States flag that was rapidly sinking to the sea level, and asked softly, "Did you see that bagger clearly?" The lookout replied in a deep voice, "Yes, once we reach Norfolk, have the first mate disembark and verify her identity. The dignity of the pirate king cannot be violated, and America's blood cannot be shed in vain." Miles away, the distinctive muffled roar of a 32-pounder echoed across the sea. The brave brigantine was sinking, but no conventional humanitarian aid was deployed. Shaq stood across from his captain, a mysterious smile on his face. "It's so ugly." The captain's face turned red. "Admiral, these despicable smugglers should be hanged. They don't deserve sympathy. I'm not saying those country bumpkins struggling in the water are ugly. I'm talking about you." Shaq's voice floated high. "Lion, Montanlio, and rhinoceros beetle, and your opponent is just a destroyer and 2 brigantine that are barely ranked as level 6, and they are commercial types, your subordinates. Didn't expect." I asked Captain Armani to remind you that what you eat is the result of the battle. I thought you could understand it more or less. It really is. Please let your subordinates wash away the shame again." Shaq shook his head and laughed. "Shame? Kindness is not a gentleman's shame, sir. You are just incompetent. Your subordinates, after returning to Hamilton, all members of the blockade formation cancelled their leave, and started training from the most basic exercise and ship drills. I will assess you on September 15th. If anyone still cannot meet my requirements by then, Shaq paused, retire voluntarily, retire. Cold sweat instantly covered the captain's face. Admiral, you need subordinates who are familiar with the hydrology of the New World. As for retirement, it is your freedom to retire or not. It is also a spur to incompetent people who are insufficiently trained. But I still hope you will treat it correctly, because from the bottom of my heart, I don't like to send the files of my subordinates back to the Navy Department. Do you understand? Yes, sir. If you understand, go and convey the order. Shaq waved his hand and drove away. The captain and the staff gathered around him like flies. It was quiet around him. He stared at the direction where the jackdaw disappeared, and suddenly said, "My stupid brother, it's so ugly." Chapter 249 Crisis of Trust. Handsome, come and play, a genuine German maiden, raised in a convent, tonight for just 1 gold octagon. Is there any gentleman willing to miss this? Indian. All you want. All you want. Streets of foul language, bricks smeared with sewage. This is New Orleans, the most egalitarian town in the New World. On July 28, the Jackdaw entered its second post-voyage rest stop. Hannah, veiled, sat alone by the window of a cafe. Her emerald eyes flickered, glancing at the nearby speakeasy at the end of a dark alley, a tavern called Barambas's Daydream. This term isn't entirely accurate. A speakeasy, as the name suggests, is a tavern housed in a basement, like Old Bart's Old Tavern, housed in the basement of the guttural French-style clothing store. From the ground, one couldn't see them, hear them, or smell them. The dark alleyway Hannah saw was just the back door of the tavern, whose front door faced the street and shared a facade with a blacksmith's shop. After finishing her second cup of tea, Hannah saw a dirty sailor run into the cafe drunk. Before the waiter could rush him away, he suddenly regained his composure, threw a penny in the air, and trotted over to Hannah. "Miss? Yesra, I've checked it out." Hannah lazily supported her chin, still looking at the crowd outside the window. "What did you say?" "The gunner took us to sit inside for 4 hours, and as expected, we waited for Mr. Helmsman. He and several strangers entered a booth nearly an hour apart. The gunner asked around and found out that it was a place specially for entertaining VIPs." VIP, Hannah frowned. Julia should be in New Orleans for the second time. Even if she has a special liking for that tavern, there is no reason for her to be treated as a VIP after only 3 visits. The gunner said the same thing. "And we have been guarding nearby to make sure that the strangers who entered the booth first did not leave. When Mr. Helmsman went in, they were still inside." "Sneaky," Hannah sighed. "How many of you came out?" "2. The gunner left 2 with him, which is enough for us." "Did you see the faces of those strangers clearly?" "I saw it clearly," Hannah nodded. "Tell the people waiting outside to find Wang Yi on the front street and tell him to keep whoever comes out. Go back and change into something respectable. Tell Noel to take Lorraine to the old tavern, and then come have tea with me." "Yes." The sailor scurried out the door. Hannah looked up with a dazed look in her eyes and called the waiter for a 3rd cup of tea. When it arrived, she slowly began to add milk. "Beljudia, Lorraine actually trusts you very much." After a while, night fell. Bell emerged from the tavern, looking exhausted. He walked down the alley, unbuttoning his belt against the wall. "Why do I have to work so hard?" Bell asked himself, feeling the relief of his bladder. Today's meeting seemed completely unnecessary, but Chris Emmons, that gambler. Bell shuddered. Quite a few of the old comrades from the Nomad remained with Shaq, holding positions of varying degrees, totaling around 50 or 60, all of whom had grown into Shaq's trusted confidants. Bell had a good relationship with most of them, except for one, Chris Emmons. The two had known each other for quite some time. By the time Bell arrived aboard the Nomad, Emmons was already Shaq's deputy chief of staff, a position and rank significantly higher than Bell's, and Shaq trusted Emmons far more than Bell did. Honestly, Emmons was a trustworthy and reliable advisor, meticulous and tireless. Given the luxury of time, he would always prepare a multitude of alternatives. Even if he knew the best option, he would gather all the materials and plans, waiting for Shaq to select the best one. This habit made him extremely meticulous. Bell hated tedious tasks and even more so, wasted work. Emmons possessed both, and so Bell disliked him. Just like this time, yesterday, when the Jackdaw safely returned to port, Bell had only come to report on his itinerary and, incidentally, to find out who his long-term contact was. Then, Emmons showed up and insisted Bell come back today, Sitting there for 3 hours straight. Did the Earl of Judea seem so idle? So idle that he had the time to listen like a fool as he laid out 4 assassination plans for Lorraine, memorizing them in his mind, awaiting Shaq's order that would never come? That gambler, didn't he really know that Shaq was a pathological brother complex? Psychopath. Such a long pee. Anyone who drinks beer for 3 hours without leaving the table to pee would probably have a pee that long. If this meeting had lasted another half hour, Bell would have suspected the meeting itself was an assassination attempt on him. Emmons might have been trying to blow him to death. So, why do I have to work so hard? You can ask Lorraine about that, he'll tell you. A pleasant, slightly gritty voice, so recognizable that once heard, you'll never forget it. Bell's heart tightened. Henna. Yesra, anything to say? Yes, Bell quickly interrupted. Lorraine wouldn't like me dying at your hands, I know. If you kill me, Lorraine will find out sooner or later, I know. If he finds out, he'll definitely distance himself from you, I know. Bell was on the verge of tears. It's already like this, and you still want to do it? Henna's voice paused for a moment. Anything else to say? At least, let me put my pants on. No, I won't look. Bang. When Bell woke up, he found himself lying in a brightly lit room hung with lanterns. His pants were on, but they were a little damp and had a faint smell of urine. 5 more men lay sprawled around him, 4 of them stormtroopers protecting Emmons, and the last one, well, Emmons. All taken down. Bell, heartbroken, raised his leg and kicked Emmons in the butt. The heavy boot slammed hard into Emmons's pants, and Emmons shuddered, his eyes expressionless. You're exposed, idiot, were his first words upon waking. Bell thought so too, but Emmons' words forced him to show no weakness. You're the one who's exposed, you gambler. Emmons sat up, calmly adjusting his clothes as he surveyed the room. A simple wooden door, no windows, no sound from outside, and no wind or light from the cracks. It seems we're underground, a separate cell, or perhaps part of a secret chamber, or maybe it's a tomb, and Lorraine buried us alive, Bell argued. Impossible. Because of the water level, the soil in New Orleans is leaking, and all the tombs are built above ground. He may have dug a new one, there's no time, so the reasoning doesn't hold. He's rich. You don't understand the power of money because you can never save any. It's true that I can't save any money, but because of that, I understand the power of money better than you. Emmons stood up and stretched his arms and legs. Besides, I've been buried alive before. And experience tells me that the person who buried me would tie my hands and feet to prevent me from finding a way out. Before he finished speaking, the simple wooden door was kicked open. Lorraine stood at the door with a strange look on his face, and said to the sailors behind him, I told you my childhood friend is a smart guy. Even if he was locked up in a closed place, he wouldn't say a word we want to hear. Chapter 250 The Reason for Betrayal. Introduce me. A dozen or so people were sitting in a large, bright room. Lorraine pointed to the only person Bell was unfamiliar with and introduced him softly. Bart, who doesn't seem to have a first or last name, is New Orleans's top intelligence dealer and the owner of the Old Tavern. Oh, and his daughter is Catalina's goddaughter, so when there's no danger of life, I tend to treat him as one of my own. Bell pursed his lips and pointed at Emmons unhappily. Chris Emmons, a Welshman, a lieutenant colonel and staff officer of the Continental Fleet, an old acquaintance of mine. He's a shameless gambler, and I would never consider him one of my own, no matter what. Gambler. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. Emmons straightened his shirt and walked towards Lorraine. Mr. Lorraine. Mr. Edward Kenway, I'm very pleased to meet you. This is a precious first impression, and I hope to have a chance to prove my innocence. Lorraine smiled non-committally. Please speak. This is not a plantation, and no one deprives you of the right to speak. Thank you very much, Emmons said in a deep and serious voice. Strictly speaking, I am not a gambler. Gamblers are emotional and are used to entrusting victory and defeat to God, praying for the gift of luck. I am rational, and I just want to prove that analysis can replace luck. It's just that I haven't been able to find a suitable formula so far, so I have to spend more experimental funds. No one could have imagined that Emmons' so-called proof of innocence was actually to refute Bell's evaluation of him. For a moment, silence. Lorraine coughed twice awkwardly. Daniel, don't you think this gentleman is a bit like you? Daniel was cold as ice. I don't think so. I will only take action when the success rate reaches 100%. Before that, I will only conduct experiments in the laboratory. He may have regarded the casino as a laboratory, then he is a complete idiot. The laboratory needs to be controllable, and the casino has too many uncontrollable things. It is a place for practice." The topic completely deviated from the Qing dynasty. Lorraine interrupted the chat in embarrassment, waved his hand and took a stack of documents from Bart. "Belle, do you know where you are? I think it's the crypt, but that gambler disagrees." "He's right." Lorraine flipped through the documents and said casually, "This is the basement of Gouderal's French charm clothing store. Its owner once held meetings and discussions with anti-Spanish liberals here. In the end, he was betrayed by a trusted companion and became a sacrifice in New Orleans' new history." Belle frowned. "Kenway, I really don't like your insinuations. To be honest, you've taken my things, and you should know I didn't betray you." "I don't know." Lorraine didn't even look up. "I've read this information 3 times and still can't tell whether it's true or not. A high-ranking lieutenant colonel and a set of intelligence that is difficult to distinguish between true and false are far from enough to prove your innocence. Then go and investigate. That's my business. What I want to know more about now is when Shaq established a base in New Orleans and why you contacted that base." "Contact?" Belle's face was confused. "Base?" Emmons was bewildered. Lorraine then confirmed that Barambis's daydream was indeed the Royal Navy's intelligence base in New Orleans. Perhaps it was the understanding in Lorraine's eyes. Or perhaps it was the exaggerated performance in his eyes, but Belle quickly realized that he had already confessed part of the truth. Fortunately, this part was destined to be revealed. He rolled his eyes and sat down on the ground. "Let us discuss this matter calmly. As a gesture of sincerity, please ask that knowledge-mongering sir to get out first." Bart's face flushed red as Lorraine actually considered Belle's proposal seriously. The result of his consideration. "Bart, our discussion will involve something you cannot know. You know you are not trustworthy, a gentleness that would move even God." Bart trudged out of the room gratefully. Henna watched him scramble out of the basement, then with a creaking sound, shut him out completely. "Okay, the atmosphere is set. It's time for you and Mr. Emmons to share some stories." As Lorraine said this, Kren, Wang Yi, and Yatrin dragged Emmons to his feet and brought him back to the cell where he and Belle had been imprisoned, closing the door to separate them. Belle didn't show any surprise, simply clearing his throat calmly. "Lorraine, do you think I might betray you?" "Lots of reasons. Our friendship is almost as old as we are." "Another reason." Belle choked. "Damn it, just because assassin didn't slit my neck in the alley. On the way back from the first round of smuggling, I met my old friend in the number 3 formation. The old crew of the Wanderer are the most trusted group of officers under Shaq Drake, and they are very united. I know that my experience will cause dissatisfaction among my old friends, because selling a few guns is not a big deal, so I took the initiative to contact him and buy some information from him. He was unwilling to betray Shaq, but for the sake of past friendship, he agreed to contact the least loyal and always short of money among us, that is, Lieutenant Colonel Emmons. As you thought, that bar is indeed connected with the Navy, but it is not a relationship between superiors and subordinates. It is more like you and the intelligence dealer just now, with limited trust, a useful base, long-term financial transactions, and good reputation. The old friend of the number 3 formation gave me the code to open the bar and asked me to wait for Emmons there. Yesterday was our first meeting. I provided the catalog of what I needed and he gave the price. Today is our second meeting for the purpose of trading. The story was remarkably complete, with its causes, consequences, twists, and turns, as well as the motivations of the relevant characters. It was impeccable, and filled with points of comparison. According to Belle, he had indeed betrayed no one. If the intelligence was true, he had even made a contribution. Unsure of the authenticity of the information, Lorraine turned and glanced casually at Carmen. Carmen, who had been recording the conversation, nodded, indicating that she had memorized everything. Lorraine sighed. "What is the price offered by Emmons?" £200. "How to settle the bill?" "I need time to verify the information, so the goods come first and the money will be given to him at the next meeting." "When is the next meeting?" 2 rounds of smuggling. "I made an appointment with him in a month, which is the evening of August 28th. Lorraine closed his eyes and thought for a while. What if you happen to be at sea that day or he can't come for some reason? He has the right to postpone. And I have the right to advance. The change of time needs to be proposed a week in advance, and then wait for the other party's response. You have agreed on very detailed things." Belle sighed with a headache. "We talked for a full 3 hours. Emmons is said to have a plan for everything, but he is so meticulous that it's annoying." "I understand." Lorraine stood up. "You have a good rest here. I will verify everything, including whether to chop you into pieces and throw you into the sea. Go ahead, fair captain. Bell waved his hand lazily. Can I ask for wine and a single room during my detention? I will go crazy if I live with Emmons. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.